2.
Okay, Jesse, are you ready to go?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you.
Okay, once again, can I have a motion to adjourn the special meeting and to go into work session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are now in work session. Thank you, folks.
Okay, so just to recap for those that haven't kept up with us, we had promotions for 2 officers. And because it's a beautiful day and because there's so many family members and other officers that come, we didn't think we could fit everybody in here, so we took it outside. But we called that meeting to order at 6:30, and we're just going right into our next one. So welcome everybody to 7:05 on Wednesday. Okay, we are in the regular meeting in the work session, sorry. And I'm going to do announcements just because it's been a little bit. So anybody have any announcements?
I do.
Dana?
This Friday at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, there will be the annual memorial for John Hartye, who was killed during a 1941 escape on April 14th, 1941. They do this every year. And I will be attending to represent the village, and I was asked to speak a few words. So, but it's a very moving, and it was a big, probably the worst escape from the prison ever in terms of casualties, because we also lost a village police officer that night. And so it's a very solemn occasion, but I'm pleased to be representing the board there.
Well, we thank you. Anything else? We're good? Sir, Deputy Mayor?
All good.
Down to this side, to my left, no announcements?
Nothing, no.
Okay, so I'm only going to announce this because it's happening before our next Wednesday's meeting. There's a count, next week for Westchester is commemorative of the Holocaust, and I will be attending, and anybody else is welcome to attend. It's open to the public. The Holocaust Memorial on Tuesday, 18th at the Commemoration Gardens on Martine Avenue. The county does a 2-hour presentation with different dignitaries. I'm not presenting. I'm simply will be attending, representing our village, but all are welcome. And I think the topic I know topic this is anti-hate, how to prevent hate not only against Jewish people, but actually use the Holocaust as education for how to prevent the rise in hatred and hateful behavior that starts at a very young age, more and more, and is really all over the country, and an increase here in New York, and a doubling effect from this year to last year, from last year to the year before. So it's quite dramatic increase. And so I'm interested to hear from people who have some expertise in that area and maybe be able to bring it back with me. And it's also a commemorative event. So that'll be on Tuesday. Okay, I think we're ready to go into the session.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
First on our agenda tonight, we have our planning consultant Valerie Menastra here, and the topic is zoning, cannabis zoning, but specific to micro business and cultivation, which is a little bit different than some of the other uses we've been talking about, such as dispensaries or places where you can actually use cannabis. But this is something that's come up. We've had to have some inquiries about it, and it's important that we bring the board up to speed with those and where we are with that, so that we can make informed decisions about that type of zoning.
So good evening. I provided the board a memo that sort of outlines, we're first of all, for the public's information, we're not here to talk about adult retail cannabis use. That will be forthcoming, but we're really here to focus on our potential uses within the village. If somebody is holding a nursery, cultivator, processor, or distributor license through New York State for cannabis. And so what we did was we looked at your zoning, at the zoning code, and looked at how these particular uses would or would not fit within the zoning. And so, for example, in your zoning, in your existing zoning code, you have greenhouses, but greenhouses are accessory uses to, for the most part, in your conservation development district or some of your multifamily, two-family homes. And it's really considered like an accessory use. It's almost like somebody would be utilizing it not for business purposes, but for their own purposes. You also have things like artesian workshops, which allow for some sort of, small batch creation of product. And then you also have in your zoning uses such as light manufacturing and warehousing. And so what you don't have is something that really would be for these types of licenses for cannabis, something that really encompasses what would most likely take place if somebody were to develop, for example, like develop a greenhouse and have one of those mixed light indoor growing facilities, or if you have a cultivator license where they would potentially be cultivating and then potentially doing some processing and distributing. So what we're here tonight is to talk a little bit about, one, is this something of interest to the village to include, and where you would potentially want to include these types of licenses or uses within the village. And then if the board is interested in including some of these, we can come back with, better definitions to fit the use of those particular licenses, and then also other additional criteria that you're going to want to consider when regulating those types of licenses.
Okay. So I had a macro question, which is
Sure.
what happens if we do nothing?
So that's the interesting question, because right now the law itself, unlike the adult use cannabis specifically talks about opting in, opting out, and communities actually
Mhm.
regulating. The current cannabis law is a little bit silent to that. Although I've talked to other planners, and I know Stuart and I talked, and I spoke to other communities, and everyone's assuming that those types of uses can be regulated like you normally would any other zoning use. Now, of course, that is yet to be seen. This is all very new, but for sure, I know we all feel that the state did not necessarily have create the law so that you could have residential districts with cannabis warehousing in them, right? So I think for the most part, the assumption was that they would fit within, warehousing, distribute, like typical uses that you would find already in the zoning code.
I have a few more, but I don't want to, I like to go last. So do people have questions specific, or should I ask a couple?
Yeah, I'll go
more?
first. Thank you very much. So my first question, starting at a high level as well, is if we were to move forward, my understanding from this language, you have micro businesses and you have cultivation.
Mhm.
Those are two separate things.
Yes.
So we could say yes to one, no to
Yes,
another.
exactly.
And could you help define what is, you did so in your overview, but for people like me that will lose track, what is a micro business? What is cultivation?
Right. So I'm going to say the micro business is more like the nursery licenses, which are less than 10,000 square feet, where the cultivator licenses range somewhere between like 5,000 to 100,000 square feet. So they're much larger operations typically, where like the nursery is a much smaller operation. Now the cultivator licenses, like the nursery licenses allow, indoor growth. But those particular licenses are prohibited from selling, like specifically flowering plants. The cultivator has a number of different tiers, but a lot of that also deals with processing, trimming, harvesting, and actually manipulating a little bit of the cannabis.
Got it. So for both of these, you've mentioned something that now I'm curious about is sales. So you have to get in New York State a license through the state, the Office of Cannabis Management.
Right.
How does that work with respect to micro businesses in cultivation?
So for the most part, the nurseries, it's most of this is dealing with gross processing and distributing. It's not necessarily setting up a retail shop for somebody to go in and purchase. That would be an adult use cannabis license. Now, could somebody potentially come in with, wanting to have like the nursery, the culture, having a one-stop shop? Yes, that's potential, but we can deal, not saying we'll deal with that down the line, but that's not part of these licenses.
I guess the reason that I'm a little bit confused is because for my memory is that
Yeah.
you're allowed to grow, it's like 4 plants, 4 adult plants, like
Right.
X number of female, maybe like
Yes.
4 female, 2 males, whatever it is, right? So that's what the state law says
Per apartment.
per
Dwelling.
dwelling, per
right.
dwelling. No, not per person, because if you and I live
the
together, we
dwelling.
can't grow double the amount. It's per place. Sorry, Bob. So yeah, they go his summer plants. So how does that work with this?
So they're very separate things. I think there's one, I mean, the growing individual dwelling units, I think is for your own consumption versus this would actually be for commercial operation.
Got it. So right now, this is for if someone wanted to come in and as part of a business, grow cannabis that they will exclusively sell to licensed retail establishments. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, if you have the like, right, so if you're a nursery and you're just gonna grow it and you only have the nursery license, then you would probably potentially sell it to like either a processor or and then they would then process it and then they would ultimately end up with this distribution, which would then go to the retail sales.
Got it. Okay. Now that is much clearer. And so the recommendation, do you have a recommendation? Or you,
No,
you
I
you
do
just,
not.
Before you
No.
get there,
No, I think for the most part, I mean, some of these licenses fall under certain zoning uses you already have on the books.
right.
The question is whether something like the more smaller scale, like the nursery, which you don't have, is that something that the village would be interested in? Most of your uses that you're looking at in terms of manufacturing and warehousing, they're permitted mostly in your waterfront district areas. So it's already permitted in like more of your business areas as opposed to any mixed use area type of thing. But we could define that even more so that it's very specific to certain zoning districts in terms of the cannabis related uses.
Okay. Last thing, I'm going to tell you what I heard and you tell me where I'm mistaken.
Okay.
Okay, so the way that it works is that if you wanted to grow cannabis to either sell to a processor that cuts all the cannabis up and makes it ready for retail, or to a retailer, then right now you could, because the state law is silent, go to a warehouse space somewhere in Ossining and do that. You could do that. And because village law is silent, state law is silent, everybody's silent, so we're silent, everybody's silent. And so you would be allowed to do that. And it seems like what we're saying is, well, you could do that, but what we want to make sure is that it's clear. We want to be spoken, not silent. Here's where you can do that and what that looks like and the square footage and all of that. And then here's where you can't. We just want to be clear about what the deal is. And so this isn't radically changing what we're doing already. It's just making it clear what is implied by the silence of the state law.
That's correct. And also, for example, like with the distribution, with the warehousing, most likely it will have like, we feel that like an applicant would hold a distributor license, right? And as opposed to just only warehousing, right? So they would be in other types of operations as opposed to just a warehouse function, or even light manufacturing potentially is going to be like a cultivator license. But then it could also potentially, have a distribution associated with it as well as like an accessory use. So we might want to make this a little bit more clear for somebody that does have these licenses coming in as to what's permitted, what's not permitted. And then also it's not as confusing to like the building department when they're going to issue building permits, or even the planning board when reviewing site plans, as to what categories they fall under and then what are the regulations.
Got it. Last 2 super quick ones. Number 1, this is coming to the board. When you say approvals, it's the board of trustees that's making those approvals, or is it a land use board? Who's doing that?
So, if this use gets worked into your zoning code as a normal, any other application or any other change of use within the village, it would be the planning board would require probably site plan approval. That being said, I mean, technically the board could also have special use permit over some of these licenses, but I think for the most part, since as you were saying, a lot of these businesses have seamlessly worked themselves into other communities and other like business areas and business zones, that I think there would be less of a need of having to have those additional steps if we have the regulations.
Got it. My very, very last one is, you mentioned other communities that you spoke to. Are there other communities that have already passed similar kinds of?
Yeah, so a lot of the outside of Westchester County, a lot of your upstate communities have large warehousing, large distributors, manufacturing is already taking place. So I think to some extent you have a smaller, your land area in terms of warehousing and that type of use is smaller. So I think you're going to most likely get some of your more of the nursery licenses as opposed to some of the large scale processing and cultivator licenses. That being said, we still should look at, including or potentially having all those uses on the books if that is something that the village is interested in.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I have a couple questions, but does anybody else have?
I had a thought. It seems to me that part of it, where these businesses go, if they require that amount of space, is where there's buildings available.
Yeah.
That would be North Water Street, right? And so if somebody wanted to buy one of the light manufacturing buildings on North Water Street and open up a indoor growing, could they do that now?
Yeah, so right now, and that's the PWA, and right now the PWA actually has conditional uses, light manufacturing and warehouse and freight movement uses.
So, and then maybe some larger spaces around town, but I don't, in terms of greenhouses, I don't know if people should be, a smaller, I don't know if residential areas should have growing facilities outside of the personal use personally.
Right.
So, so if somebody has a big lot and wants to put up a greenhouse and start a micro business, I don't know if that's something.
Right, and I think that's why, that's definitely one of the land uses that I think the village should contemplate adding an additional use for nursery specifically because the greenhouses, and you do have, nurseries are permitted within the village just in general in terms of it's a retail use, but to really identify the nursery and the use under the nursery license as a use of its own, because I do think that you have the potential of having something like that located in the PWA, but that is not permitted under the PWA because it's an accessory use to like residential. It's considered almost like a garden, but that sort of use as an accessory and not necessarily a commercial use. The way it's defined in your code right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Valerie. I missed that part where when we ask you for a section of our zoning book or zoning map, you actually remember all those things. I was looking at the map myself just to remember where the potential use of this businesses could be, and literally kind of concentrates from Highland Avenue down in a way. That's what it comes down to. I really don't have any specific questions. I think more for me is not even a concern, but I think we have to sort of define the first part of the law that came in last year that we haven't been working on that one for. We sort of have an idea of what that looks like.
Right, the residential, yes.
Exactly. So right now, I think in a way that I would love to move forward with this because there's a lot of loopholes. And I think since that we are clarifying a lot of the stuff internally right now that you guys are working on that, I think that could be the beneficial for our code itself to have clarifications and all this.
Right.
And I'll be in favor of having everything. I'm in support of what you said. But I think it's also important that these two pieces of legislation or these two pieces of law that we're going to be passing eventually have to be work hand to hand. And I
Yes.
think that overlap, it needs to happen now.
Yes. So we were planning to have them both together, but then there were a number of like the regulations were still pending. And I believe I just looked today and it looks like maybe something there, they've posted some things that are saying adopted. So I have to look into it a little bit more. Do you happen to know?
The adopted deal with more medical and certain,
Right.
in that perspective, they have not yet adopted anything relating either to retail or anything like that. What they recently adopted deal more with, as I said, medical and with testing facilities. So that's really what they've just put back formally on their books.
Right, so we have been hesitant to bring back to the board any sort of regulations regarding the adult use retail because of the fact that there are these pending regulations within the state that are going to basically limit even further communities' abilities to regulate time, place, and manner with this particular use. So we thought we would start this conversation dealing with these other licenses first while we're waiting for better direction from the state on the retail cannabis. That being said, we did prepare a map for you that was part of your packet, but it also includes, it highlights your community facilities, school grounds, houses of worship, which will be very much tie into the adult use cannabis, and additional discussions we'll have later on as to which zones you would want to potentially allow for that use.
That's helpful, and that was helpful. So this is just a general statement, not related to the topic that we were talking about. Because people in the community, even myself, sometimes I kind of go back to our resolutions. So I don't know if I'm talking to Karen, Maddie, or Jamie, but packages that are public information that should be part of the agenda. I think this is not the first time I had asked. Links for those paperworks, those maps, I think is important for the community to be aware of what we are talking about. So please make sure that those are added to our agenda. I don't have any other questions right now, so thank you, Valerie.
Just a question, you're talking about Valerie's memo?
The part, like the map and information that we talked about, just in general, because there's a lot of topics that we have talked about in the past where a lot of information that is shared to the public that is not actually linked to our agenda
understood. So
items.
you mean for going forward in this particular vein and all others, but specifically in this one,
No,
anything generated forward?
Again, yes, and I have asked that in the past as well. So yes, thank you. I don't have any-
Just so that we're crystal clear on that. Anything that goes in advance that's not confidential in nature. Any memos?
Karen, can you turn on your microphone, please?
Anything that goes into the board in advance will attach to the agenda. All right, I'm not sure that you may have said that, but I don't know that we all interpret it the same way. So we will do that going forward. That is no problem.
So couple of questions,
Sure.
hi Valerie. So I want to just also clarify something. When we first heard about the cannabis laws, and I know there's just like a work in progress, right? Because change is
Very much
always,
so.
everybody wanted, the state passed a law and now everybody moves forward. They're hiring hundreds of people. I think last count was 300 people, which for New York State's like a nothing. It's 20 million plus people. It's 300 people's for a state of this size, like nothing.
Right.
Probably going to have to triple that, et cetera, right? Just to manage different things. But that's the way it works. First, you have to pass the legislation, then you have to sort of manage it, right? You
Right.
can't do that reverse. But one of the things I remember is the whole idea of vertical integration. So you said before, and I may have just misunderstood. So my understanding is you can't be a grower and a seller because that's vertical integration. So the same company, the same limited liability company, whatever that they are, can't grow and then sell.
Right.
Am I correct about that?
I believe so. I mean, they're different licenses. They're not part of the same license. Now, I don't know whether if ultimately they could be part of the same building. That I don't think has been fully defined yet. at this
Okay, because I think that actually becomes important as well, because the idea was that these mega corporations, which have started in Colorado, California, I mean, and some of the other places that are way ahead of us, not way ahead of us, they did this sooner than New York did. It was supposed to help in plain English, the little people, right? It was
Right.
supposed to have some social justice issues to it. And it turns out they're owned by mega companies that whose boards are diverse, but nevertheless, they're not exactly of the regular people.
Right.
Basketball stars, all sorts of folks that have entered it. And that Colorado is a great example. That said, when they passed in New York, they were very careful to say it can't be vertically integrated. So when we do these nurseries, I'm just curious as to how that it plays into it. Can you grow enough pot in a, whatever square footage, which we would have to define to really call it a business? I mean, you need a huge warehouse on one hand. On the other hand, they've had a lot of problems in the city for the past 15 years, in that some of the buildings that people think are residences aren't residences. They're buildings because all you need is a lamp, the right temperature, and you can grow pot endlessly. And it takes just a couple of people. It's a great business. You don't have to worry about, building codes and da 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 da. So, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that it's you need the land, you need electricity, you need
No,
the
well,
water,
that's
you need, I mean,
how-
you need it's a big
It's a
operation.
big endeavor, which is how the police catches them, because they see the water bill and the electric bill go up. But it wasn't residences. The buildings were designed for housing, but it ended up not being housing. So I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen, but it doesn't sound like it would. It sounds like we're talking about small spaces, unless there's some big warehouse down by the water, which is where, or I guess there's probably some big spaces that anybody would give up to do this. I'm not sure how profitable that would be. So is the goal also to make sure that we really specify exactly the usage, who can get it, how they use it? Like, is that part of the zoning, or is it just locations?
Right, so I think a lot of that is the licensing, and that deals with like New York State. I think ours would be specifically focused on the use of the land, and we would identify the types of licenses that could potentially go into like that zoning district.
Got it.
In turn, and then, but it's very specific to the use as opposed to the operations themselves.
So you would look and say, okay, New York State now has, I'm making up a number, 3
Right.
types of licenses. How do we want to zone for that? If in 3 months, New York State has 7 types of licenses, you will probably be coming back here and saying, okay, there are 4 new licenses called whatever they're called that allows whatever they allow. How do you want to zone for that? Is that sort of your recommendation?
Yes. I
So
guess.
we don't deal with licenses, we react to these licenses because we can't predict what New York State's going to do, to the state
Right, well,
government.
and I think what's the process, and Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, the process is that somebody petitions for these licenses to New York State, and then New York State gives them licenses, and some of it is also, okay, now go find the space for these license, and that's where we get the phone calls, as to, oh, I found a warehouse, or I found a
Mhm.
potential building, can I move my business into there? And then that's where it would be better for us to be able to define that and actually say, yes, this particular zoning district you can, these zoning districts you cannot.
And so my last question is, do we know, like, I can have a sense of what a barber shop might need in the use of water and electricity, a sense, a retail store that sells clothing, a restaurant,
Right.
how many employees, how many parking spaces they might need, how many people, like when and where, which is some part of our decisioning. Do we have a sense of what it takes to, except for what I read in like general whatever, of what some of these licenses, because that's really what we're talking about, is the license of how many people are involved, electricity, water, like safety issues, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I can give you a couple case studies. I don't have them with me tonight, but there are a few warehouses and distributions and some of these cultivator license projects that we've worked on upstate. And so I can give you a general assessment of like how big they were, how many employees they were anticipating, because some of them had to actually go through like a seeker review because they were, we're talking about like 500,000 to 1 million square feet of like, so we're talking about very, very big.
Well, there's a lot
know, but
of
at least that would
empty
give you-
industrial parks sitting upstate New York with cobwebs.
Right.
I mean, entire industries have left, so they're The buildings are just waiting.
Right.
for
So I mean,
this.
I can give you a general assessment
Right.
of like what those types of, what the ones we've worked on, and I can see if I can find anything else.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I don't know very much about the business aspect of this. Well, great. Those were my questions, but I agree with Manny that, at least for my part, I think we should sort of go forward with your recommendation. Is that where we're all sort of ending up? That we need to sort of get our arms around this and make sure it's used the way it's supposed to be used, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Yeah, is that about the general? Okay, thank you.
All right. Next, we also have Valerie here to speak about the rezoning petition. Says if you recall, we heard rezoning petitions from Marcelo Epelini on South Highland Avenue, as well as from the owners of the Arcadian Shopping Plaza a few weeks ago. So Valerie's here to discuss what next steps could look like based on the board's inclination on how they would like to move forward or not with these requests.
Okay. So last, as Karen mentioned, last work session, there was presentations and we kind of walked through like the overall approval process. But here we want to talk a little bit about next steps before we even start for them to petition the approval process. I think based
I'm
on.
sorry. So it was said that they petitioned us. So is the petition process started?
No.
So they didn't
Before- no,
petition
no,
us.
There's no
Okay.
petition. So before any petition process starts, there are maybe some next steps that the board might want to consider in terms of providing a little bit more direction or on both particular potential applications. So why don't we just take one at a time? Like, let's start off with the Arcadian Shopping Center. So with this particular project, it would be specifically in the PC zone. So the PC zone is more or less the Acadian Shopping Center. As you heard, the applicants are potentially petitioning to have a zoning text amendment that would really focus on pretty much the entire Acadian Shopping Center except for the Stop and Shop site. So they already have a potential team together. They are ready to move to the next steps. And before they actually submit something official, I think based upon this board's comments at last meeting and some of the concerns that you raised, it might be beneficial for the board to request for them to provide you like a proposed zoning text for review. As well as a little bit more of an updated concept plan that actually meets the zoning text that they're potentially proposing, and including some more information on like the phasing, because they did talk about this phasing, and there were a number of questions from the board as to what exactly does that mean and how would that play out. And then the other thing is there was concerns from the board that, there really needs to be input from the neighbors and some sort of community engagement. And so maybe also asking them to provide like a draft community engagement plan for the board's consideration. So this way, if you feel comfortable ultimately with some of the proposed zoning text amendments, as well as like the concept plan, as well as their community engagement plan, that might at least have that particular application in a better position, that if it does a formal petition, that you at least know generally what it is that they're looking to do, and then also how that process would sort of unfold. It would still require, this is not necessarily giving any sort of green light to the project. It would still require an environmental review and then ultimately approval from the boards.
From this board
Yeah.
or from which boards? When you say
Be-
boards, I
right,
need you
so
to be
it'd
very
It would
specific.
be your board for the actual zoning text amendments, and then clearly the planning board for the site plan approval
After
after.
us.
Right, well, the way something like this would work, it would require the seeker process first, then ultimately back to your board to adopt the rezoning. Once the rezoning is in place, then the planning board could do its site plan approval.
Does anybody have questions on either side?
So some of the things that you mentioned, thank you for the summary, are things that I would be interested in, the community engagement plan, all of that. They also mentioned that they had started conversations with the schools,
Right,
and that's something that I would want to know more specifics
Okay.
about. Particularly, what the potential impact on the schools maybe of this potential zoning text change and then the subsequent development that would come from it. And that would be important for me as an addition that I haven't heard.
Dana?
Are we just discussing Arcadian right now or both?
Yeah,
of them?
just
Just
Arcadian?
Arcadia.
No, I mean, what they want to do is very large scale, very ambitious, and would have a very large impact. So, I would like to see as much as possible beforehand, to make sure it's done.
Something specific that you would need.
Well, I'm interested in the school impact and the neighborhood impact primarily. Yeah.
Tillman? Bob? Manny?
Yeah, I believe I was the one who mentioned about the engagement with the schools for both of the projects. So I guess just a point of clarification
Yep.
on Valerie. Last time when the two entities came in front of us, I'm going to call them, was one of the questions. And even before that, there wasn't the questions where a lot merge or combining the lots. I'm looking at the GIS map for that particular zone,
Right.
which is on for one particular person, I'm gonna call it, or the entity. They already have 4 different lots
Yes.
within that itself as
Right.
well.
Right.
So what does that look like? I know we're not talking about the other property, but when Commons, what the information that was shared with us, it was like, no, they need to combine those lots before they even applied with anything. So is that same concept will apply to this particular project?
Right, so if depending on how they develop the zoning text amendments,
my-
right,
correct.
then yes, there would potentially be a merger of those lots. In terms of like the Stop and Shop site, while that might not necessarily be contemplated right now to be part of any sort of petition, any sort of redevelopment, any sort of zoning text amendment, as well as the seeker analysis would take into consideration, what if that particular property also went as well?
So, I mean, that to me is like, again, even though it was stated that they're not going to go anywhere, they want to incorporate that, but I think that's an element that I would like to keep in consideration of how do we keep that in mind as a commercial parcel at the same time as a residential, if anything. So that's just my comment for this particular project. So yeah, thank you.
I have one more,
Sure.
and this is more of a question. Scarborough train station, that's Briarcliff.
It's part of it's in Briarcliff and I believe part of it's in Austining.
None of it's in Austining.
The Scarborough train station
The,
is in Briarcliff.
right, but the part of the parking lot, I think, isn't, no, maybe
think
not.
so.
Okay.
Part of the road, because the dividing line is right in that area with the road that goes down to the station. So part of the road on the way down to the station, if I remember correctly, is ours, at least partially down that hill. But we can double check on that. But
Yeah, yeah.
Mostly, essentially, that is Scarborough Manor train station.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason that I ask is because I also don't know to what extent the Briarcliff board has been engaged as part of this process. And I don't know what the usual
Mhm.
protocol would be, but if it were the reverse, I would want the developer to come to us and say, hey, we're thinking about building this thing right next to your train station and so forth. So my addition, if it's feasible, would be to have conversations with the Briarcliff board as well.
So that would, that's something that the Briarcliff board would be part of, like, it could be an involved agency within the seeker process. So as if for some reason the board, if this actually comes to a formal petition and starts the seeker process, we can identify them as an involved agency and send them additional information, and then they could comment during the public process.
I guess for me, that because of the way that I understand the process is you need the text amendment changed first, then seeker, then plan. And so if we're saying like, hey, we want you to engage with the school, like make sure the schools are cool, make sure Briarcliff's cool, like before starting seeker, that would be,
Right,
But
so
please.
let me just explain the process again. It's complicated. So there would be an initial petition asking the village board to consider the rezoning. Before the village board could even vote on that, zoning text amendment, that zoning text amendment, it would have to go through the secret process. That's where the environmental review would take place. Once there's either, it would have to either be like either you have a negative declaration, which you're basically saying there's no significant adverse impact, or you go through an EIS process, and then ultimately you end up with a findings, and the findings identify, what are the impacts and what are the mitigations that are going to be incorporated. At that point in time, then the board could vote on the zoning text amendment. So throughout that process is when you can get engagement from the various other agencies and local governments.
So even though it's environmental by name, it's also functioning as kind of a engagement with these related agencies.
Right. When we say environment, it's anything in the environment. So it does deal with traffic, it deals with economic impacts, it deals with community resources, including schools. So it really does run the gamut in terms of potential impacts.
Thank you.
So can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
So, and obviously some of us, or maybe all of us, were aware of what the new 7-Eleven gas station is, and
Right.
the Taco Bell, and we know the car wash is there, and then there's a project sort of in between, an empty lot that has been there for years. And my understanding is that they have a difficulty of making their case again, more or less. One of the reasons is because a traffic study, and that goes back to what does that look like at that intersection? So when this process starts, obviously there's going to be a traffic study involved. My routers will be, and I don't know how will that work, obviously, because if we're looking at two potential projects that are really very close to each other, is that a traffic study to be done as a one project instead of as two different projects. Does that make sense? Because I know we have done that in the past, sometimes when we have clusters of projects going in, and what does that
Right.
look like for a traffic study as well?
Right. So they usually look at what they call the cumulative effects. So they'll look at any projects that are pending. If you're referring to the other potential zoning text amendment, then yes, you would look at both of those as well as part of that traffic study.
And sorry, and maybe I can call you for this, but how will that work? Because part of that obviously is traffic from, the municipality itself, sure, even though it's Route 9, which is New York State Road DOT itself. So it's like, how does that, maybe I'll call you tomorrow.
Right. Well, I
just-
mean, I think just very simply, so typically a traffic engineer will ask for, if they'll do traffic counts on what's existing today, then they'll look to see what's coming through the pipeline. And they'll take either traffic studies that have already been done on those individual projects, or at times that they can do, what they'll do is they'll factor in a certain amount of traffic based on certain standards. If you know that there's going to be a development of so many units coming in, or additional square feet of something like 7-Eleven, and then they'll factor that into what they project out, and they call it the built condition. So they would project that out, and they usually also include in like what they call background volume, so that just generally like background volume tends to increase, and then they'll also put that figure in so that ultimately your traffic study will come out with a date that it's anticipated that that particular project would be built, and you would have your traffic counts based upon that. So it is a bit of an estimate for sure, but that's how they include the various projects that haven't been yet developed.
Can I ask a related question on traffic? Sure. Because this is a, you don't have to answer if you don't. I can have this in a different conversation. We can have that because we are working obviously an intersection here down the street for
Yes.
us. And obviously at some point of time, that's going to impact, no matter how we look at it, it's going to have an impact.
Right.
It may have an impact at each end of our village. And even though they're not, these two projects are so apart from each other, but it does have an effect.
Right.
Is that something that at some point of time, they may consider this as well?
Yes, and because this is all goes on Route 9, New York State DOT is also going to be very interested
Got
in
it.
making sure there's various aspects also included in a traffic study as well.
Okay,
So they'll be very much involved in the review of any traffic study.
Okay. thank you.
So a lot of my questions have been asked and answered. And one of the things I brought up very specifically is right now, there are two entrances to this entire 13 acres. Is that what this is? 12 or 13?
They reference 16.
Okay, so somewhere between 12 and 16. Yes, there's trees, there's but basically you got two small entrances 100 feet from each other. So while there's two, it's on the same road, and that is a concern. On the other side is like a historical area with single home residences, not a lot of space there. And so I have real concerns about, that's why I don't like the concept of layering. You know, we'll see how it works, then we'll roll out more into phases. The phases bothered me a lot, so I'm trying to really tighten that up. And you've mentioned it, but it's also the entrances. You can't enter from Route 9, it's a cliff. I mean, I guess you can. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but it's Route 9 where it goes this way and the lot is down a
Right.
number of feet. Then you've got, you know, CVS and you've got this entrance, and then you've got the other side, which is houses. And if I'm not mistaken, there must be some wetland or something there because there's that stream. I'm sorry? There's a big, I'm sorry, there's that huge stream that it was, says flooded. Can't really build on that. That's an artery to the Hudson, I mean. So I raised that concern with them. So I'm very interested to see what they do. I would like to, I mean, I know it's an environmental, but really isn't environment. Environment is like, what kind of concrete do you use? And, you know, so I'm very also interested in green space and what they're going to do about that. And not just we'll take care of it later. I remember when the library was built, because one of my neighbors was involved, that whole green space and what they do was a huge fight and and it was constantly shrugged off. Don't worry, you know, we'll put some plants. No, I mean, actually, I want that included in fabrication, what they're doing, because if we're moving from essentially a strip mall, which is all concrete, no trees, no nothing, to where people and humans live, I wasn't kidding when I said, I really like to understand, you know, people have pets more now than ever, like there's no parks right there. It's a state road, really busy state road, and it's busy 13 hours a day. It's a major artery. So I'm very interested in everything people said, the schools, the traffic, the entrances. I don't like the phased in approach at all. I mean, for me that, you know, they should know what they're doing, because they plan things years in advance. There are very few developers of this magnitude that sort of, let's try it out and then we'll figure it out. That's just, in my opinion, not something we could live with. I do like the fact that their zone is a singular zone that doesn't really affect others. I mean, the traffic will and all of that. They mentioned that, oh, you know, they won't put like the pool and all that. It should be the other way around. They're all the way at the edge of town. Our community centers are ready at its peak usage, and we're going to invest a lot more in that. But I actually would argue the other way around, that they really have to. And when I recently went to Chappaqua to see what they built there, which was moderate income, is it labor force? Like, you know, for workforce from the outside, it all looks the same, but there was definitely percentages of workforce, affordable, attainable. The apartments, when I went inside, actually look similar. It was just that the flooring may have been a higher grade wood that cost twice as much as I wouldn't know the difference until I actually, you know, looked at it very closely, because they all looked really nice. One less closet, you know, something like that. So there are plans out there. We shouldn't be settling for like a text chain. Like there should be a lot more, because what I like about this whole thing, which is why I support at least the discussion, is that it's totally self-contained. So that was everything everybody said, plus I'm interested in why the supermarket is being excluded. What's that about? I thought it was all being included.
It's the way they did the the phases are based on the current leases that they have in place for the properties. And Stop and Shop has a lease in like perpetuity. They have a much, I don't know exactly how long their
No,
lease
it's a
is, but
long-term
they have
lease
a
is what you're saying.
long-term
Yeah,
lease.
That's fine.
They have no, they do well. And they have no intention of leaving. So
So how much of that area, because it can't just be the supermarket, it must also be the loading docks, it must be the airspace, and it must be a certain amount of parking. So out of the Arcadian, which I go to all the time, so if you could describe to me, is it the supermarket and that entire parking in front of them? Is that a zone?
Yeah, I mean, that's all that particular property. And that's not part of the 16 acres that they were contemplating.
Wait, that's not part of the 16? That can't be right.
no, I
Okay.
think I think that's included in the total 16 acres of the
Yeah.
lot. I think they're working on this. So the way they broke it down, if you remember, it was where the back quadrant where Westchester Community College is now. Then it was the front quadrant where the bank is and the nail salon and like halfway into the, and then it was the other lot, the third lot was the McDonald's where, that end. But I don't, we can look at this and we
I
can
think I
ask.
just
and it
need to
may show-
understand
I
it
think
more.
I mean, I have.
I don't
their
think you need
stuff.
to explain it all to me. I
Yeah.
just want to be very clear about what is included,
Right.
if what isn't being included, and where the entrance is for what is and isn't. Because if the only way to get to the supermarket is by using exactly the same narrow entrance, and there's no difference in that, all of those employees which I love that people are employed there, that's a good thing, but they all have cars. And so I want to ask my favorite question, which is about parking, which is, when we do these kind of petitions, am I correct or incorrect in saying that it actually, everything is on the table, that we do not have to, or do we have to follow the comp plan of 1.5 ridiculousness for parking that we have? Or does that open the door for the board, this board, to say we want a different structure of parking, whether it's different numbers, whether it's whatever?
So well, it's not so much right now, your current zoning has the requirements of the 1.25. You could create new zoning for this, new parking requirements for this particular.
For this particular one,
Right. And I am looking at
because they're like a zone within themselves. We could not do it if affecting this affects other properties, but this is just them. This whole thing is about that square that they sit on. It doesn't affect anybody else around the area. Is that correct? Whatever we change, that's a
That's correct.
question.
That's correct.
So anything we change, literally anything we change on this does not affect anybody but this area, which you'll define by the time we meet again, whether it's 16 or 12 or 13, whether, what acreage is included in the supermarket, what isn't, including loading zones and all of that stuff. Because for me, that would be, in addition to everything my colleagues have said, I'd be very interested. And lastly, this is just curiosity and political, so feel free to answer or not. When I got a lot of complaints about Taco Bell and 7-Eleven and who needs another gas station and blah, 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 because people think that's Ossining. Because across the street it is. It's called the Arcadian. That's actually Briarcliff, correct?
Yes.
It's not the town of, it's actually Briarcliff.
That's correct.
When did Briarcliff come to Ossining and include us in the seeker when they did that?
So typically, the way a lot of the processes work, that they might just notify like the clerk's office and.
And when did that happen?
I am unaware of receiving any documentation from the clerk with regard to this project.
Right.
So we'll find out, because they may have. Not for nothing. Every time we do stuff, I think this is a great community, right? We ask everybody, right? We
Right.
do what we're supposed to. But our neighbors actually don't seem to do any of that. They don't do it when they give zoning privileges to like homes that dump their crap all over our neighborhoods. The parks took a few decades before people who apparently live in Ossining, like my mother and her grandchildren, could use their parks. But everybody in Briarcliff could use our parks, and everybody in Connecticut could use our parks, apparently. I love living here, but there are times when I get a little bit annoyed, and you may have noticed that in my tone of my voice right now. So they're not actually then required, because if they're required by law and they didn't do it, so it doesn't sound like you're actually required by law to inform your neighbors. It's the right thing to do, but it doesn't actually sound like you do. Oh, please.
To follow up with what Valerie's saying.
Yeah.
Under seeker, we are definitely an interested party. They're absolutely obligated to notify the village.
Oh, okay. So when did they do that?
I just said that I do not
Oh, you
recall
don't know.
ever
Okay.
receiving any notification. And let me just say this. Sue's not here. There is no question that if a notice came in to Sue Donnelly, I would
Oh,
have
yeah,
gotten
I'm
it.
not saying, right, no, I'm just saying that like you typically, when I'm just saying in general in communities, they don't necessarily make sure that, everyone's aware. It might just be just a public hearing notification that just gets slipped in and that's it. It's not, it's not a formal invite or here's the information. A lot of times it's just a public hearing notification.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Sheet of
I'd
paper.
like
That's
to.
That was noticed.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so it was noticed, but because it was noticed in some paper and we didn't read the paper that week, we didn't know about it.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, right. I mean, the thing is, when it's a larger project, sometimes you might, now that, like, for example, if you want to notify the Village of Briarcliff Manor, if this project moves forward, we could send them a full package, that type of, and so that it's clear that we're asking for their input. Other times it's just.
Okay.
Mayor, I can give you an example. 8189 South Highland, which is
Mhm.
Birchbrook Manor.
Mhm.
We notified Briarcliff.
Mhm.
They gave a one-page letter saying they had no opposition, but they were notified. We notify the school district
I
every
remember
single
that.
time. Metro North notified every single time. On this one, with regard to the Taco Bell, and again,
Okay.
the notification would have come to the manager's office at the end of the day.
Okay.
And
I think we also, I mean, at least in my letters made it, that's fine. I get the idea. In my letters, I kept telling people it's just not Ossining. It's hard for people to understand that on one side of the street, it's not even the town of Ossining. One side it's Briarcliff and we don't control, it's not our municipality. They have their own mayor. They should have called them to complain. So I want to be very clear, and that's why I'm being very clear about this parcel and what it includes, what it doesn't include, even within that, it's actually pretty square, and get the right acreage and all of that. As far as the commutation, it's sort of interesting because today, whether they should or not, there are a number of people who live in Ossining, a number of them that park right in the corner of that property because it's like empty spaces. And they just walk down to the station to save money. It's not my problem or my business. And I don't know that they all live in Ossining. I just sort of hear that. But once they build all this stuff, that does become an issue. And it may be interesting to deal with commutation because they talk about how they're near a commuter line. It's just not this municipality's commute. It's like another one's. So it'd be interesting what their point of view is about whether they want to be nice people and say, hey, let's create a space for commuters, or whether they'll say, no, we need it for the residents and the employees and all of that. So I'm just curious more. It's not a legal issue. It's just my personal curiosity, that's all. And there is Scarborough Manor is right up the road, but is that within the footage of what I would call community engagement? I mean, they're right up the
It would
road.
certainly be, the developer has reached out to us saying, we want to be, their position is we want to reach out, what groups, the school district, what groups. I think that again, part of the reason you reach out is because you have a seeker process or a process that determines who needs to be noticed, who's an interested party. And that's one reason. Part of it is, that you'll probably hear things from your closest neighbor when you start doing anything in a close proximity to their neighborhood. So certainly Scarborough Manor,
Dog
Sparta
Tavern is,
District.
Sparta, right?
I think there's any number of nearby neighborhoods that are going to be mostly concerned about the impact on traffic and density and all those other things that, and then there's probably in the broader sense of the community, the school district will have concerns about possibly the number of children. Other people may
Well, I
have
have concerns about our community center and how many people
that
we
could
can
be,
hold.
there usually is a recreation fee tied to this. So how can that be
that's-
used, or can they
okay.
apply that to recreation? So they're interested in doing community engagement, I think. But if I'm hearing right, I just want to make sure that we're catching everything. We're all taking notes, but we'll go back to the developer. They've already sort of made a recommendation of what they would like to do. We wanted to, in terms of basically saying we want to be able to provide certain things, and we'll just be very specific with what the board requires, and that a community engagement plan would be part of that.
Right. And I think in terms of like a revised concept plan, we can highlight that that you want to see the amenities and green space, as well as this issue of like the commuters, right? Are they going to consider doing anything for?
That is a secondary. I said,
Right.
that's when I said, when I went into the Briarcliff thing, it came after that. That for
Okay.
me was a curiosity. I don't know if I would say it that way. I'm curious more than anything else. But green space, I need that underlined, because putting in some trees between parking spaces is not what I call green
Right.
space, but they will.
Right.
Because that's what most developers do. And if they use linear park with me one more time, them and all the other developers, I'm not going to be reacting really well to it.
Right.
Like actual green space where senior citizens, their grandchildren, a parent and a child can actually have space, because they're really, except for one little park down there, there's a big main road and a bunch of little roads and CVS and McDonald's. There's really not a place for humans until you go way into the parks, way up the road. So you need a car to get to, frankly. I mean, I guess you could walk it.
So the property behind CVS, that's CVS's,
What property?
right? And I gotta presume this guy's aware of the flooding problem down there.
They are very much aware.
Yes. And CVS is very much, because they were flooded also
Right.
in the last storm.
I
The
mean, there's a
store.
perfect opportunity for green space. And
Mhm.
while it's opened up to maybe remediate the
Thank you, Bob.
flooding
I
problem.
was being subtle, but thank you for underscoring where I was heading.
The other thing, just to
Yes.
recap, with the schools and traffic. So most likely a traffic study, because a traffic study associated with this particular type of development would be a robust traffic study. So my guess is the developer would probably ask to have that take place during like any sort of environmental review, if the board was open to moving to the next, like entertaining a petition. With the schools, though, we could potentially have them do, there typically when you undertake a school study, you'll want to try to ultimately get information based on the school district, right? And comparables within the school district itself. But there is a quick and dirty way of doing an estimate for school children based upon like these Rutgers generated numbers, although they're not like, it's not as accurate as getting the numbers directly from the school district, but we could ask them as part of the concept plan to do a very generic school study, so that at least you have a sense of the school generation that might.
So there are two
come.
studies that developers use. One, the parents usually stand up at Board of Ed meetings and yell and scream for using it. And the other one is the consultants that they hire. And I was at the board meeting, when did we have Fifth Wednesday? Last week or the week before? Yeah, so I went to the Board of Ed meeting, which is really interesting, because this is a big topic, is how you count people.
Yes.
and That it's flattening out, and the parents getting up and saying, how could you be saying that when people are in the hallways, and it doesn't look like it's flattening out. It looks like there are more and more kids every year, and who's really coming here and all that. I mean, that was a big topic. It's not my topic. I didn't have anything to add to the conversation. I was just curious and attended. So there are a couple of studies apparently. So I just want to make sure when I hear, I don't like the words quick and dirty, because it
Right,
makes
so
me nervous.
for the seeker
I just want to make
analysis-
sure what we're using and that it's consistent with what, I mean, they're updating their numbers every year. They've
Right,
hired
so-
consultants, the board is, and it's all our same taxes.
Right,
You know,
so-
all of us that live here are paying the school taxes and the village, so we should be able to use
Right, so
similar studies.
the study that, so they look at projections, so they look at, in terms of population changes within the school district and cohorts. The studies that I'm referring to as school studies is 1-bedroom apartments typically generate this many children per
Mhm.
dwelling unit or per bedroom apartment. So the Rutgers study that I'm referring to when I refer to as quick and dirty, that one will require less time, but at least you get a general estimate of like ballpark, very, very generic ballpark. Ultimately, during the seeker review,
They
they-
use the same.
we would ask them to get the ratios that they're developing. So for example, they would let us know in a typical 1-bedroom apartment of an apartment with this many units built in this time period, this is how many school children are going to Ossining School District for every 1-bedroom apartment or every 2-bedroom apartments. And then the developers can use those more accurate numbers in order to estimate what the school generation would be.
Okay. And lastly, I got confused about the retail space. I got the residential, that they're moving into residential, but I got confused as to what percentage and what stays retail.
Right.
So if I just don't bother explaining now, just I want to make sure that there's an understanding. If there's any community space, the way we're doing in the affordable units on Water Street, I want to be very clear as to that square footage. And again, parking, blah, 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 blah. Great. Well, that was it. Did we have any more? I think we covered. Yeah, did we cover? Okay. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Now we have the
Yeah.
second, right.
Is this your night tonight?
Well, no, we have one more property, that's general
No,
business.
no.
Oh,
So we're done with this. one.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, but now you're going to talk
Yes.
about
Next
the
one.
second
Yeah.
property.
So
that
the
also
second-
is looking for a similar type of.
Right.
zoning text
So
amendment.
the second one, this one deals with the general business district.
Mhm.
And so the proposed text, there was a proposed text that was submitted to the board. The text itself is very similar to the text, or actually it's verbatim to the text that dealing with the residential uses within the Village Center, NC2 and NC1 zoning districts. And those are already established mixed-use zoning districts. So the way the zoning text is written right now, approximately 40% of the properties in the general business district would be eligible for these residential uses. The general business district, as you know, is found within the southern and northern section of the village. So with this particular analysis in terms of the zoning texts and how that would apply to the GB district, it's a little bit more complicated because there's numerous properties, as well as each property is individually owned. So it's a little harder to predict as to what would ultimately be the generation of any potential residential.
How many
uses.
properties?
I believe there's a total of when I have it here, I think there was a total of like 30 something properties. Hold on. No, there was
No, 13 that get affected
yeah,
by the recommendation that he's on. Yeah,
That's where I got that.
yeah,
I believe is 13.
So where are you getting 30 something?
The total
the total.
of all the district itself.
So they have, hold on. So in the southern district, it covers 31 tax parcels, of which 13 would comply with the potential zoning text amendments. And then in the northern section, I don't think they did an analysis on the northern section. They just focused on the southern section.
They meaning the landlord.
The landlord, right. So what one of the things that if the village board is interested in looking at this a little bit closer, my suggestion would be, because this is a little bit more of a unique situation in terms of analysis, that one, you're taking a commercial only district and you're potentially turning it into a mixed use district along Route 9. So you're probably going to want to, especially if you're going to be integrating residential uses, similar to what we've just talked about in the PC district, that you want to see this concept, you really want to see it as a really kind of mixed use community, you're going to want to start developing zoning text that's also going to encourage that type of development, as opposed to right now, what they're proposing is they're adding basically in the zoning text just the underlining square footages for like the residential units, but didn't really look at the site as a whole in terms of, you're going to potentially want maybe a little bit having the building not a step back as far. You're going to want to have parking in the rear. You're going to want to have some of those other types of built environments that encourage the mixed use type of development if you're going to redevelop the GB district into a mixed use district. Another thing that the village is going to want to consider is that the GB allows for more intensive uses, like, for example, a vehicle repair, self-storage, some warehouse, intensive artisan workspace, where like your mixed use districts like the VC and NC1 don't allow those types of uses. So so if you're going to have those types of more intensive uses along with potentially mixed use or residential uses, you're going to want to develop some other type of buffering and requirements and screening so that you can have a little bit of a break between the more intensive uses and maybe some of your mixed uses. In addition, you might want to consider not focusing the zoning text amendments on a specific area within the village, as opposed to having both the northern and southern sections of the GB district allowed for mixed use. So these are, and this is, I think, these are questions that don't have to be answered tonight, but these are questions that, the person that's interested in potentially redeveloping this one property is a local land owner, but not necessarily a developer. And it might be something that the village might want to consider undertaking themselves and developing this kind of mixed use concept if it's something that the village board is interested in.
When you say the north end of the GB, what are you talking about?
So
Highland, Ave-
yeah, I
The
have
upper
that.
part is, if you look at the map, I don't know.
the upper
maybe-
part of Highland, that North Highland? No.
No,
Yeah, I
no, no,
have-
it's just
I have-
up from there.
Okay,
The gas
oh,
stations, the Shell
right.
gas station, passing
Yeah,
that before the
King Shell,
laundromat,
yeah.
where La
After,
Placita
before,
is,
Oh, okay.
pretty much that.
All right.
Yeah, where like Brandon Furniture is.
Brandon Furniture, that's North
Talking
Highland.
about 100 yards. This is not like, it's not the other side of the village. They're talking about just up the road.
Yeah, well, there's,
When
right,
they say
so.
north, they just mean
Because
North
the
Island.
other, right, the other GB
Island.
is in the southern, right next to the
100
Acadian
yards
Shopping
away.
Center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
So it starts with Nelson Avenue.
Yeah.
From Nelson Avenue all the way down to CVS. That's pretty much what the zone is. So let me ask you.
Well, there's two, and then there's also up by.
Yeah, yeah,
up
the
by,
the
yeah,
part,
Snowden,
yeah, there's
yeah.
another cluster, yeah.
So what is what we're talking about now going to affect the GB up on North Island?
Well, depending on
Depending
how you do it,
Yeah.
right? So this is why I was just, this is why we're raising this. This is a little bit more of a complex issue than the PC, even though it's a smaller development, it's a smaller property. So, there's the PC district is going to have more potential environmental impacts, and that assessment is going to be more in depth. This is going to be more of a nuance in terms of where do you want to allow for mixed uses? You could potentially create a new zoning district, or you could specifically tie a zoning text amendments to very specific areas associated with like maybe more compatible uses. So
Help me understand this, because that was part of the conversation where the McCloskey home was here several years back. That particular area is in a T zone, and they were trying to figure out a use more like a GB zone. That's what sort of it was, or the NC1 portion of this. So what is the difference in the PO zone right now that we have in the professional office areas? Because if you look at the map right now, sure, there's not really that much of a professional. It's mainly pretty much residential. I want to say 70% residential
right.
on that section.
So your PO does allow for residential uses where your GB does not. Right now, if you look at the PO district, you don't know, and PO doesn't have your gas stations, it doesn't have your automotive repairs. Your GB tends to have those types of uses right now. That doesn't mean that has to stay that way, but you're also not going to want to have it, you're going to want to be careful you don't want to zone out all those types of uses because they are needed within a community.
Yeah, but it does. I'm not sure what kind of commercial is or office space is, but it does have a big, on the PO section before Nelson Park, there's a
Right.
big area, I want to call it a big building, which they use it as a commercial. It's not just offices, sure. So it does it's a pre-existing non-conforming, whatever area it is, I'm gonna call it for now. But it does have a little bit of a different scenario to that.
Mhm.
And it's tied into an MF1, which is also one lot that
Right.
Stuart just brought up a few minutes ago on a particular project that they did there.
Right.
So so you do have, and I don't want to call it precedent, sure, because a lot of people don't like to call it as a precedent that we have done things in the past, but there's a path that we have. Previous boards and current boards and maybe future boards will want to see it. And we have done regulations in the past where it limits the use or how people uses the space.
Right.
I think you worked with us in regards to the pawn shops that they came in at some point in time many years ago, and we drafted that whole zoning change or amendment to limit those
Right.
within different districts. So there's ways for us to accomplish something if the board wants to do it. I get it's complex, but zoning itself is complex.
Right.
We've been dealing with this for years.
Right.
So, and the environment that we are going with is a lot of changes in different areas. We have S75s where multifamilies are, underside lots and all this other stuff. We have, areas that the MF1s that at some point in time, there were different zones and boards changes to different areas. So I don't know. I mean, I'm in favor to try to see how can we do this in a respectful manner and an equal balance to the neighborhood. How do we get there? That's something that we can develop as with restrictions and setbacks. And I think that that could be accomplished. But that's just me.
So just the one question I have. So we talk about a southern zone and a northern zone. If I'm understanding this right, we can tailor the southern zone and not bother with the northern zone, correct?
We could.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the issues that came up last time we had the conversation was that there are a number of other properties within the southern zone that would be impacted in the sense that they would also kind of qualify for this kind of change. Do we have any sense of how many of those would actually be looking to make these kinds of changes?
We do not. So typically when you would do a review like this, you would identify, like whatever number of properties would potentially fall under, and you could do an estimate of how many potential units could be developed. And you would just do an analysis. This would be like the environmental review would be an analysis of how allowing or, developing so many units. Now, typically, not all of those would get developed all at once, and it would be a very slow, introduction into those additional dwelling units. And every one of those new developments would also have to require its own seeker analysis. So this would just be more of a generic type of analysis, whether how many units would be developed if you went and moved forward with a zoning text amendment. That being said, part of the exercise could be is to really focus as to where you would want to see that type of mixed use environment. And we could look at it a little bit in more detail as to regulating it to very specific areas. I know they're mentioning, or they suggested joining residential districts in 2 or more sides, but I think they were also contemplating using the MF1 across the street on like Route 9. And so that gets a little bit, whether that's really adjoining or whether, so we will have to deal with that. But so we could actually look at maybe there's other criteria that the board might want to consider in terms of identifying what would be advantageous for a mixed use versus keeping it as just primarily commercial.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. The definition of spot zoning is when you are changing zoning to just affect a single property or set of properties that would conceivably impact everyone, but really you're changing it to just impact one particular person or group of people. Is that what spot zoning is?
Spot zoning is not necessarily impacting more, it's just really impacting that particular property owner. So it would be specifically rezoning like one property for a new zone where it doesn't, now let me just clarify. There can be planning context in which it makes sense to do that because a particular property is so unique in terms of its characteristics or whatever that it makes sense to rezone. But this would be, there is no planning, support behind it. It would just be for one particular property owner and it's an economic advantage to them.
Right. So the challenge that I have is that I don't have any particular issue with this particular endeavor that this person came to us with of wanting to combine the properties and then do this. I get it. That makes sense. And I'm for it. But the process of getting there would involve spot zoning and what, as I understand it, in that we're saying like, well, it's GB. Well, not like GB North, just GB South. Well, and GB South, not like GB South, like over there, but like, and like by the time we get to it, it's just like just this property, right?
So, right, if you want to.
I'm going to urge you to be careful when you start saying that it is actually spot zoning,
Right.
because you're walking yourself down a line where we'll find ourselves in White Plains Supreme Court. It's not spot zoning at this point because we're not talking about his home.
Right.
We're talking about the GB district. What you could do is split your GB districts. You could end up with GB1, GB2, but you're talking about the effect on the district, not, so he's not, would he like it if it's just his house? Absolutely. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the effect on the district, which is one reason that the board might want to say, we will take this actually away from you and we will do the generic environmental impact statement. We'll see what the effect will be. And then we'll determine what we want to do in that district as to how you want to play it either way. We could still have him do it, but it would have to be one of the things that becomes problematic with a zoning text amendment is that the applicant tends to forget that it is not just him. This was Snowden Woods, which was the situation there. You want to be sure that you're looking at the entire district and everything that occurs within that district. And the applicant, be it we doing it as a GEIS or is the applicant on their own, has to be able to say, this is what's going to happen to the entire district. Now, it may be sensible to split the GB district into A and B or 1 and 2, however you want to do it. But even if you do that, it's not just going to be Mr. Ippoliti's property. It's going to be all the properties that are around there and how they are impacted. That's why the notice situation is much more prominent in this, because everybody is going to have to know where we are. If we were just talking Mr. Ippoliti, you may then be more toward a spot, but it's not, because right now it's everybody. He may be the only one who's directly going to say, I want to do this right now,
Right.
but you have to look at it from the impact that every property within that zone could potentially be impacted.
And I'm going to piggyback on that one, and thank you, Stuart, for that clarification. So two things, and I was looking at the latest map, the latest zoning map that we have in the overlay in the form-based code that we did, sure, just to get a little bit of a brighter concept in here. But if we, and I'm not going to say the spot zoning portion of it, but if we're talking about, like the Stuart said, on this particular application or this particular topic or property that we're talking about on the GB zone, is like he said, if the owner, like they said, we're doing this, but we want to make the changes to all the zone. Let's go back to the previous conversation that we just had. Just one owner. We're changing, and we don't have, it seems like the board itself doesn't have a problem with changing the zoning for one owner. Is that considered spot zoning?
I guess, I mean,
I
don't know.
But
I
it's
mean,
its own, but it's its
it's-
own, it's
it's
a,
a
but it's
legal-
its own.
I know,
And
I get
it's
that,
a
I get that,
global
but it
developer,
doesn't
not a-
matter, but
not-
it's
it does
one
matter.
owner.
I guess here's to conclude my thought. Last week, I believe, we were having a conversation about fire pits, right? And the conversation was, how far away should the fire pit be from a property line? And we as a board wanted the maximum number of people that wanted to have fire pits to be able to have fire pits. And that's how we kind of crafted the conversation. What I haven't heard so far is from other people on the board, including myself, the desire, hey, we would like to have as many properties be commercial on the bottom, residential up top as possible. And hey, here's an opportunity for us to do that. And let's do that in a way that makes sense. Now, here's a person that came to us saying that's what they would like to do. And so we're kind of opening the conversation. But for me, it's a solution searching for a problem as opposed to the other way around, which typically is the way that we do things. And so am I for GEIS to figure out if the impact is large enough to warrant us going down the path? Like maybe. But generally speaking, I'm cool with the way that things are in GB, generally north and south. I'm open to new ideas, but it seems like it's not exactly the way that we do things. And so that's where a lot of these kinds of questions are coming up for me.
So for me, I'm going to do this in plain English again, because I think when we talk in GBs and Ts and all that stuff, it all sounds great. Let's be real here for a minute for the public. We have a Route 9, a state road, not ours, a very busy road with trucks, school buses and everything else, and buses that stop every whatever, when they do that correctly. We have a strip that I could walk pretty easily that we're talking about. North, south, please, it's 100 yards. And it's commercial on one side, predominantly. On the other side, some commercial like Domino's, whatever. But the residential, you got to drive into a street, got to drive into the development. They built 6-foot fences, if I measured that correctly. Grass, beaches, not even a sidewalk there. So make sure nobody walks there. It's dangerous. The setback is huge. First, you got the grass, then you got a 6-foot fence that they compared to in the last meeting. Then there's parking. Then there's garages, and then you got that. On this side of the road, it's a narrow strip. Behind this narrow strip are residential homes, condos whose names I forgot those, yeah, built pretty compact, with a road that splits into two. That's how narrow this little spot is. And we're talking about not a developer, a landlord who wants to go from 3 things to 21 things, units. I don't want to name how many bedrooms, In my opinion, to do that, because one landlord wants to have more rental units, we change all of these other facts. Whether it helps the community or not has never been made clear, right? The Arcadian is a global developer that actually, based on conversation, brought in a different team to come in who has more knowledge about how to build. I think you termed it village within a village. I don't know if that's an architectural term. It's not my term, but whatever. To look at it, a zone that they've been in, both entities have been about 20 years. If I remember correctly, both entities said, we bought this about 20 years ago. One employs hundreds of people and it's all encircled. It will not affect, I don't mean it won't affect traffic. We're concerned about it. I don't mean it doesn't affect school. When we do anything, it will not affect what others can do. So Corsi decides they're going to build apartments on top and all these others. And that strip is so narrow. The Arcadian, we're arguing whether it's 13 or 16 acres and it's buried down, right? Because there's a cliff on one side. And this is on Route 9, like the busiest road that we have going on here. And behind it is not a nice 10 acres. It's there, everything is butting up against everything and everything affects everything. So for me, the downside is these are not developers who've had any experience. It's a landlord that wants to go from X to 7 times X. Every landlord would like to go from X to 7X. That doesn't mean it's good for this village. And it's, for me, such a commercial area that is so developed and owned individually. So it's not a group that owns all of these. I don't see a tremendous reason that benefits the community to make a change to the way it is. For me, based on what I heard. Now, if they came and said, it's not really 21 units, maybe it's 6 units or 9 units, and I'm going to do this and I'll do that, maybe. obviously the drawing that JB did, I had said, I don't think it even fits within anything, but that's residential. You could say it fits with Corsi, which is basically a big square building because they fix cars in there, right? To me, I don't see a benefit to this community. And I think when you do changes, there are two ways I look at it. One, for me, it's somebody owns some house somewhere or property somewhere and something happens and they need something to change whatever because it's not livable anymore or it's something. Fine. Or, and it's contained to them, or it's a major change that by changing, and we've been through this before, I don't particularly like what Ossining has done in the past. So for me, the things that were done in the past that created overdevelopment, not the best developers. I mean, I think we moved away from that. I don't want to go back there. And I've been sitting in this chair, I don't know, whatever, 7, 8 years at this point. Not a long time, but not a short time. So got to come in here with something that benefits the community. And that is not so overly complex that everybody's going to be working on this because a landlord wants to go from 3 to 7x, 3x to 7x. Not a reasonable thing. And it's not an apples to apples. This is an argument I've been having for a while. This is not an apples to apples conversation. And when you drive there, which we do, all of us every day, and when I looked at the property, it is very compact already. Like, where are you building all this stuff? And for what purpose? And for whose purpose? Every landlord in Westchester County would like to go from 3 to 7 times 3. Everybody, then they make more money. I get that. That's great for them. So I need to hear the community benefit. I need to understand the setback rules. I think that strip that they're sitting on is so narrow on both sides. I don't think they're dealing with that. I think the setback has to be no less than what those condos or co-ops on the other side of the street that they were using as they're co-ops, right? They're 2 floors. They were using that as an example of why they're justifying this. It's across the street. They're mostly co-ops, right? 2-story co-ops. So you'd setback. If you do those setbacks, you couldn't build there because I think those setbacks actually put you in another development. It doesn't even fit. And the reason there are setbacks is because of the danger to children, to the elderly, to people walking, to pedestrians, to the other businesses, et cetera, et cetera. Even the car wash backs up in the summer all the way into Route 9. Even that simple thing of a
That's
2-lane
Barclay,
car
though.
wash. So it backs up the whole Route 9. It's just the way it is. I'm not complaining. They hire a lot of people.
can
It's a good business, but it's already backing up from one change in one business.
So
that's my opinion about
and that's fine. I
not
think and I
thinking
think
this
it's
is-
an overall conversation, and you and I can have a different discussion. Not here. It looks like because I can go there all night, as you guys all know that. Arguing.
No,
a
excuse,
point,
no,
a
here's the
point.
thing. So I chair this committee, this meeting. So here's the thing. Everybody got to speak.
Okay.
Everybody gave their opinion. This is my opinion, my
haven't
singular.
spoken.
Oh, you haven't? I'm sorry. I thought I did the whole thing.
For the other one.
You did for the other one.
But I
So,
have some
so everybody
questions about
gets to
this.
have their say. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to state my point of view. Valerie needs to take all of that, so do the staff and say, okay, there are different points of view. If there isn't an agreement, at least we have to understand the different point of view. I'm not here to argue actually any of my.
So let me
Okay,
ask
no,
you.
now,
So,
I also think Dana should go
okay.
because I think every person should state what they have to state and then we can get back to it.
I have a couple of concerns. One is that if we were to undertake an analysis to rezone the GB, just the southern one, it sounds like a lengthy and expensive process. And we would do it otherwise if it weren't for this request?
Right, so I mean, you can ask the developer to undertake that work. The reason why we brought this to your attention, because we think that, as Stuart said, the developer's gonna have to look at the entire district. And I think right now, even what they're proposing, the village would want to take a look at in terms of the zoning tax, right? Because you just don't want to adopt
But we're already looking at our zoning text we're already doing a lot of zoning stuff, right? So this would be an additional project that we would have to take on because of this one request.
Yes.
The other thing that I'm concerned about is the, thinking long-term, the degradation of our commercial tax base. Because right now you have a commercial district and whatever you think of it, I personally love Corsi Tire, go there all the time. We have a commercial district that's functional. Now, there are these 3 residential homes in there. But if you turn that into a mixed use, you are opening a Pandora's box. I just really think somebody's going to buy Corsi, tear it down and build, long term, I'm thinking 10, 20 years out. I don't see how that benefits us if we're undermining, we don't have enough commercial tax base. That's why our property taxes are so high. And I don't want to do anything that's going to undermine the businesses we do have. And I just think that I think that this would all of a sudden throw the whole thing up into free for all.
I just want a quick clarifying question. This is a legitimate question, not a leading question. That Dale's explained. Oh, yes, Dale's in the house.
Sitting there
Shout
quietly.
out to Dale. Is it not true that the amount that we get for sales tax isn't a function of how many businesses we have, but of our population? And it goes to the county, and then the county doles it out according to population.
That's nothing to do with the businesses.
Is it on? Not yet.
Is it on now?
It's on now.
Yes, that is correct, because
You have to
sales,
repeat it, but yeah.
sales tax is basically countywide. So they take the full amount of sales tax countywide, and then it's based on population of each individual entity within that county. So that is how it gets distributed.
So that you're, just to clarify your point about somebody might buy Corsi Tire, we'll have one less business, our sales tax goes down, but it's not a 1-to-1 because we don't get that sales tax directly.
No, I'll never pretend to be an economic expert.
I always thought you were.
I think-
Well,
I think
boy,
it's-
were you wrong.
I think she's referring to the
she's
school
But all I
taxes and
could,
property
but
taxes.
I'm trying to think of long-term
It's a
ramifications.
smart
I
observation.
I'm trying to
think
think
you're
of long-
referring to more like,
Property
Property.
taxes itself. I think that's what
Right,
you're referring
that's
to,
where-
Yeah.
not sale
Right,
taxes
right.
itself.
Right, I was thinking of property taxes,
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm just not sure. I'm just not convinced that we need to go down a long and expensive road to please one land.
Can I ask a question based on that? Because we have done, I've been sitting here for a while as well. And Valerie, you are a planner, full-time planner, a while back as well, when you did the comp plan in itself. And I know probably numbers have changed, but more or less, we have taken studies like this in the past. When developers have come in or they have ideas, or we just wanted to kind of resort, more or less. And I will never hold you to the number. How much do you think something like this will cost?
would
If the
cost-
village was to go that route?
Well, I mean, I think first, I think my advice would be, before you even start dealing with that, is maybe taking the first step in actually looking at maybe the properties and looking at like the zoning text, and then maybe coming up with some sort of parameters or guidelines that you would want to see. So for example, just like the mayor was mentioning about like some of the properties being small. So you might want to have a minimum acreage, right?
Which we
So
have, we've done that before.
Right, right. But my point is that you might want to take a look at the GB district and then take a look at what you would want to see in terms of minimum acreage for like any sort of mixed use, right? And you start developing those parameters, and then you could do a quick build out analysis. The actual seeker piece itself would be a little bit more, it would be definitely more expensive, but I think the initial steps.
Just give me numbers, please.
It won't take long to do like a build out analysis,
Is
maybe
it
like,
20,000?
no,
50,000?
like it could be less than a week's worth of work.
So is it,
Like it could be
$5,000?
5,000, it could be like
5,000.
5,000.
Properties?
Well, so like I said before, you'd want to you want to kind of develop a framework first in terms of the zoning text. just in.
You're not losing the audience.
Everyone's leaving.
It's nothing you said, and it's a work session. It's-
So, no, I would,
Early.
We're allowed to-
I would
allowed to
recommend,
go.
I would recommend, let's, you know, because right now, the zoning text that they're proposing, like I said, is basically just they took from the village center and said, let's just apply that. My suggestion would be maybe come back with some framework or parameters that you might want to consider based on how, so to develop a particular property in the best way, you know, possible. Because they kind of looked at it only by what the adjoining zoning districts. And that's how they came up with their 30 or their 40% of their properties, where you might want to look at, you know, minimum acreage. You might want to look at in terms of not only adjoining zoning districts, but you also might want to look at, you know, maybe some of the locations, right? Like we said before, you might want to look at something that has to be like in the southern section where you might have a little bit more of the residential versus the other. So my point is we could develop a little bit of a framework, and then once you are happy with the framework, then you can do a quick build out analysis in terms of the number of residential units that would be potentially possible.
So. Because at some point, you know, we had conversations about C-Core in Maine. You know, that's something that we have talked about in the past.
Yes.
We talked about when we're sort of looking at the comp plan itself, we talked about looking at different sections of our village where it didn't make any sense, where there were not really any commercials units, but we wanted to be more consistent to what it was there before. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but you know, we have done that before in the past and sort of tried to regulate all these things. Look, I like that. I think there's a potential for us to craft something, and that's for even for Arcadian. You know, we can craft, like it was said before, there's no 1.5, you know, parking spaces. We can tell them we're gonna need 2 parking spaces per dwelling, you know, just like, you know, a single family home has. So there are items that we can utilize to standardize a lot of the stuff that some members have problems with or concerns. So you know, for argument's sake, is like, I don't see, if we're talking about benefits, I don't see the benefits of, you know, this whole section on the, you know, the PC zone being a benefit to the community within itself. You know, if we're looking at the benefits, we're talking about, I want to say it's
mean the
more
Arcadian?
there, what PC, that's the PC zone. We are talking about hundreds of units. We're not talking about 150 units. Let's say potentially, I'm just going to put a number on it. Let's say in the GB zone, we come up with this 100 units. I'm going to make it an even number, 100 units in total that it could potentially be built out in the future. The PC zone itself is over 300 units potentially that they could be built out in here. So what is the benefit? So what we saying, you know, and I'm going to be very frank. Are we saying a big developer is okay to come to our community or be part of our community? It's okay for us to allow them to do this. And when a small homeowner that wants to do something, we're putting all these hurdles to do that. We are here to represent everybody and trying to be fair and have an equal balance to this whole thing. So I'm not arguing, I'm just making a statement.
Well,
about
nobody,
this as well.
okay, well, I personally do not benefit. I personally don't favor large developers over the regular guy, okay? I don't. So let's just get that out there. But they are not apples to apples. They are different types of projects, and they are making different demands on us when we are really super busy.
No, I understand that. Well, I'm not saying
And
that
how
we are
many
favorable. No.
apartment units can our village take?
I'm sorry, I
Okay,
didn't-
that's the big question
sorry,
to
I didn't- I
me.
didn't- I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
How many apartment units can our village take? How many more apartment buildings can this village take?
I'm not disagreeing with you, Dana. I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, if we are looking into, forget about the GB zone. So now I want to have, is that okay with you, Mayor? Because this is an open
Mhm.
forum in a way. Now, nothing to do with what is being asked for us, but I want to make sure that we have the balance and the equilibrium in what we're trying to make a decision. Sure. So let's say Let's say we're gonna tell the property owner that is looking to make the changes in the GB zone. We're not interested. We just don't want to do it. Okay? But we're gonna tell the developer from Arcadian, make it simple, we need you to move forward. We want you
But
to
what
move
they're going to
forward.
do is not going to set off a chain reaction of redevelopment,
Okay, so but what is, so
which is what this would do,
okay.
in my opinion.
So
Huh?
what the PC zone does,
You
how
don't
many
agree? I
units,
would
how
love to
many
hear
units
it.
do you think?
Oh,
How many units do you? How
well, then
many?
why, Vincent, save, tell us
So-
why. I'm not saying I know what I'm
I don't
talking
agree
about.
because of the fact that we could tailor it and set parameters. So these other 13 properties might not fall into getting it done. They'll, or break it up, as he says, A and B zone. Whether I'm in favor or not in favor of what this guy wants to do, I'm just looking at the big picture. If the parameters fit for that guy's property, acreage, whatever, and the other 13 pieces don't, oh, well, so be it.
But he has to combine the three, right, into one.
Whatever it is, there, it's his property. That's a process he has to do. But it doesn't mean that the other 12 or 13 are going to even fit within the parameters that we set.
Well, then we're doing something for him.
Not necessarily.
If we're doing something where he's the only one who qualifies within the parameters.
That's what I'm saying. So that's
What
my
is
argument.
that?
That was my statement before. It's like, look, in the same concept is like we are. This particular, he has Arcadian, he has 4 different lots. And if you start looking at the breakdown, one of the lots that he has that belongs to, I'm gonna call it that belongs to C-Town, not C-Town, Stop and Shop, it goes right through the middle of the lot, of the parking lot. So that means not even half of the parking lot belongs to where, I'm gonna call it where WCC is. So for him to do whatever he wants to do, he's gonna have to combine these 4 lots as well. So
So
concept wise.
They don't own all those lots?
They do. It's
They
just
do.
different parcels. It's like in my house, let's say I have 2 lots. I don't have 2 lots, but let's say I have 2 lots. One is empty and the other one is my house. So I will have to combine the 2 lots to do something if I wanted to develop something. So it's the same concept. He owns all these lots. But they're lots.
Well, fine, okay, so there are all the lots that need
So,
to
but
be,
in concept,
that
in
doesn't
concept,
change the
yeah,
fact.
but in concept, that's what I'm saying. In concept, forget about PC, forget about GB. In concept itself is the same process that anybody will have to go through. In concept is the same thing that we are saying, you cannot do this, but you can do this.
No,
And you can develop,
absolutely not.
but that's, okay,
It's-
that's my
it's a-
opinion.
no,
That's my
fine.
opinion.
Okay, so I don't know how we're gonna keep discussing this. This is not an apples to apples, and by the way, there are developers that own lots of strip malls around here. This is not the only one. The effect is not a trickle down and trickle up and trickle sideways to everybody around them. It is strictly within the acreage that they own, and we can ask them to do what we want versus a person who's not a developer, but a landlord. And the comparison of the two, I think, is just, for me, an inadequate comparison. It's not the same thing at all. So we can talk about it all night, or we could say that everybody sort of said their piece. Did you say your piece? Because we apparently left you out. Okay. Valerie, out of this conversation, for this part of the conversation, we finished part A, this is part B. Where are we? What's the next steps? Have you garnered anything from this, or you're
So
more
I
confused
think,
than you
right, so
were
I
when you
think,
walked in?
right, so I think
I
the,
feel like you're more confused than when you were.
no, I
coming
think,
in.
I'm
well,
confused.
well, clearly, I think, why don't I do this? Why don't I take a look a little bit more? I mean, why don't I come back again with this, just with the southern, let's just focus on the southern GB district, right? And why don't I come back with maybe a little bit more of like the actual uses that are taking place, right? So that way you can have a little bit of, might help in terms of doing the comparison of, are there any other mixed uses, or, and I'll look at the property tax codes, we can provide you a map. And then we can also talk about maybe some parameters that you might want to consider if the board we're interested in moving, potentially allowing for some mixed use. And I just want to be clear that, I know we were talking about individual like property, but the zoning text amendments are not rezonings, and rezonings are where the spot zoning comes into play. So zoning text amendments, even if you are updating a zoning text amendment, first of all, we'll make sure that ultimately it does make sense for whatever zoning text amendment takes place in terms of planning or in terms of economic needs or, regional housing. There will be a planning context behind any zoning text amendment, but we can start having maybe just some additional dialogue before any final decisions are made.
Thank you.
And can it be done within the context, because I'm gonna always keep it in a language that people understand,
Yes,
because zoning is not a language
No,
that
it's
people
not.
understand. Barely lawyers understand it,
Right.
let alone people who live here.
right.
So I'm gonna constantly ask for, like, if I drive by there, I want to know what you're saying.
Yes.
So if there's a road behind there, and I don't care about it's 80% and 83% or 29%, because if there's a river that floods every year behind it, I want to see that in
Yeah.
the calculation. Because one of the things the apartments did on the other side is when there's water, there's all this work they have to do. And I'm not willing to sort of think about that later on, because we already know it all exists. And this is a congested, densely populated with businesses
Right.
area. It's not like in upstate New York where there are fields that people then sit there and go, oh, let's build something here. We're in the opposite way. We are one of the most densely populated villages in the county. And so that is a framework when we drive and we see this and when we walk, what that looks like. And so I want it in like the human context of what's on both sides.
Yep.
Because, all of this percentages and all that doesn't talk about, oh, and by the way, you're butting up right against a tow truck company. That's
And we
right
can,
there.
right, so why don't we work on like a visual, a map that helps define some of that.
Thank you.
Can I ask one last question? This is not related to that.
Okay.
NC2,
Yeah.
if you wanted to do residential on NC2, you are capable to put residential in there?
So, yes,
Okay. Just keep in mind, C-Town is an NC2 zone. And the
Uh.
property on the nursery as well is also on an NC2. So all the way up in Cronin Avenue is an NC2 with potential people
Yes.
can do all those. things
well,
they
but
want.
right, it is a mixed use zoning
Correct.
district, that's correct,
Okay, just, thank
If
you.
they ever go that way.
yes,
Legally, without any changes.
No, without us, just
yes,
as of right.
that's correct.
Right, correct. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Are we on to the next?
thank you. I believe so.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie. Next, our treasurer Dale Brennan is here to present. She had sent a memo, which is attached to the agenda to discuss the budget modifications for fiscal year end 2022.
Hello, Dale.
Hello, thank you, Village Manager, Village Mayor, Board, good evening. Thank you for having me. It's that time of year to do some housekeeping, as we like to call it, for our fiscal year end, but in advance of the auditors coming. The auditors are slated to start on April 24th for the village audit and go out for 2 weeks. So I like to hopefully have everything ticked and tied before they arrive so that we just have a nice, smooth process. Although I'll warn you, because I have one more capital budget adjustment that I'd like to submit for year end, because we actually did receive some grant funds for the building department vehicles. So that is going to offset what we had actually budgeted for to pay for them in full from the general fund. So it'll alleviate some of that spending, and we can just transfer back to the general fund, the overage amount, and close the project for 2022.
Same accounting firm as last year?
Yes,
And it's annual, right?
yes,
Okay.
every year. Yep.
Have a lot to live up to, my friend Dale. You get an A+ every year. It's like a lot of
Yes.
pressure.
And two of them, because we also do the town.
there
So
was-
we did the town. Well,
No, it's good because it affects, for people that don't know, all of these
Mhm.
audits, they do affect bond ratings, which right now is like a big deal as rates are changing,
yes.
et cetera, which I'll be very curious to see how our bond rating is at the end of the year,
Mhm.
before, at least before we do the budgets in October. Okay,
Right,
great.
which we will know because we will be going out to market. Probably the end of August, into September, we usually close to renew. And if we're moving anything over from the ban to a bond, depending on the life of how long it's been out there, but they did extend the bans for, normally it's a 5-year and you have to either pay it off or roll it into a long-term debt. But with COVID, they actually extended it an additional 2 years for anything borrowed 2017 forward. So we could potentially not have to go to the bond market, but a lot of it's going to play out in terms of where we are with DRI, the water treatment plant, various things versus keeping things as a ban in the short term world. But that will be further conversation, more so during the year. During 2022, I had actually come to the board a couple of times to do some course corrections during the year. As we went along, as we saw our gas, diesel, and fuel lines were exceeding our budgets. The board so kindly adopted budget resolutions during that period in order to cover those over expenditures, and as well as with our health insurance and the allocation between expenditures and actual stop loss revenues, which helped, offset over expenditures on those. So I thank you for that. And these are our final cleanup budget adjustments for the 2022 year as we get closer to year end and finishing up and in terms of DPW, where they do more of a cost accounting in terms of charging people where they actually work versus where they were budgeted. That encourages some cleanup at year end. We had some budget adjustments needed for the recreations department. But what I would like to note on their budgets in terms of covering additional expenditures of 336,000, their recreation revenues for 2022 were actually $303,000 over the budgeted amount for revenues. So they almost actually washed in that. And in that, I'm also not including grant funds that were received for the Youth Bureau, $78,186. So actually they overshot their revenues. So that's great. In terms of revenues.
Remind me again, so grants are revenues?
Grants in our world are they come under the revenue side of the budget, and they'll come in depending on what's awarded or actually filed for at the end of the year. I cannot do an accounts receivable for a grant unless we've actually put in the documents and they're signed at the end of the year. So if there were funds expended in 2022 that were actually not submitting to get reimbursed until 2023, you'll see a lag with those coming in as revenue in 2023, but they were actually expenditures incurred in 2022.
And
We
they
see
get-
that with FEMA.
So what's gonna happen when we get these $1 million, $2 million, and it might take 3 years? You might have expenditures. The revenue doesn't get accounted for till 3 years later, but the expenditures are done over a 3 year. What happens when we start on the bigger, like? You understand?
Understood, yes.
Got it.
The difference in those is that they are capital projects. So when you establish a capital project, it's a perpetual fund. And so it lasts as long as the life of the project.
So all those larger grants, the
Mhm.
DRI plus e-bike, which is not a DRI,
Mhm,
community center, all of those
mhm. Yes,
are capital,
they are
all of
capital.
them.
Yes.
Okay.
And they will be set up as such, just like the Route 9, the road diet, set up as a capital. So those are a little different than these smaller type grants. And we also did see funds finally coming in from FEMA for Isaias. I never can pronounce that one. Yes, 20, yes, yes. Ida. So we finally received some funds for that. We're still waiting for, I think, some COVID money at this point.
Okay.
But we'll get there.
That's fine.
It's a process. So we did receive 374,000 in FEMA between state and federal funds in 2022. Which is great because none of these expenses were actually incurred in 2022. They were incurred in previous years. But again, I did not set up a receivable because it's not guaranteed till the point that they come back and they say, okay, here's your P4 document, which basically says, okay, we signed on and we agree, and this is the amount you're going to get. So until that point, we do not establish any revenue streams. But I did want to put into context, while there are different monies moving around within general fund, within water fund, within sewer fund, we are not going outside of the appropriation side of the equation in order to make sure all of our accounts are covered. It's more in terms of just to make sure within any given department, the 0.1 group, which is personal services, the 0.2 group, which is equipment, and the 0.4 group, which is contractual, isn't over budget. And that's the goal of submitting these budget adjustments. In terms of actual fund balance, currently, as I projected out today with our numbers right now, which I'm pretty confident that they're not going to change too much, maybe a little addition actually with closing a capital project and moving monies back. But otherwise, nothing necessarily material. At the end of 2021 for the general fund. No, 21 for the general fund. We had 18.5 million in unassigned fund balance. So that's fund balance that isn't earmarked directly for anything at that point. Although obviously we've talked about using funds for the DRI or funding portion side. But until the point that we create a capital project and establish, the same and then allocate, right now it still sits in unassigned. So for 2022 revenues, we're seeing 44,323,000 offset by expenses of 42,877,000. So we're net positive 1.445 million to go back to general fund balance. A little bit of an offset because I do have to take away from fund balance to feed our reserve control balance accounts. We have a few on the books for fire department reserves, economic development, PEG monies. So all those, they're on an individual line within fund balance. So after I do those gyrations, encumbrances, we have to cover those because those are expenses that are going to flow over into 2023, but they've been allocated and signed for in 2022. So we have to make sure we're covered for those, and then prepaid expenses. So that ultimately is really our retirement bill that we pay in December for January, February, and March. So that also gets booked to take it out of our fund balance, so we're not using it. So at the end of the day, for general fund, 12/31/2022, we're going to hopefully have $19,901,460 in general fund, which again will help towards the DRI.
Only sounds like a lot of money when you say it, which actually doesn't even cover most of our stuff.
Right.
Is that a segue for you to do the? Yeah, that would have been great. Are you done?
I'll just give you a quick recap of the water fund. So the water fund at the end of 2021 had 8,196,000. Revenues came in at 13,412,000, and expenses came in at 12,349,000. Again, gyrations for covering any reserves. So we're basically bringing into fund balance for the water fund about $1 million. I do want to point out that I did pay off, as we had discussed briefly during the year, and as we had done back in 2021, when we did the original borrow for the water treatment plant, we did it in 3 phases. We paid off the first phase in 2021. We paid off now the second phase of that bond in 2022, which is part of my budget adjustment. So it was almost a little over 800,000. That was the balance on that band payment coming due. And then I'd like to bring to the board in 2023, paying off the final piece of the ban. Because at this point, you know, we were building up in terms of having the bond come due, right? But we're not quite there yet. So I think it's beneficial to use, you know, these funds and pay down our debt. And then we'll be starting at a different stepping stone, hopefully during this year. So, but even with using an additional amount of the budget, we're still increasing fund balance by a little over $1 million. The sewer fund at the end of 2021, we had $2,088,933. We had revenues of $2,139,555 and expenditures of $1,934,551, encouraging us to put about 217,000 back into fund balance for the sewer fund. So net positive all the way around. So hoping that we bring this into 2023. But we did course correct during the budget process. Thank you for that, because that's definitely going to cover, as I was looking at where we ended up being over for 2022, I'm like, yeah, but we took care of it in 23. So I'm hoping that we covered most of those bases so that we're not doing so many budget adjustments. Any questions?
Thanks, Gail.
I just have, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Dale. It's always awesome to get all these numbers down. Just a point of clarification, and I know it's the same memo because I just went back to my emails, the one that is on our website. But it says 2022 to go to modification on the legislator, and the work session is 2022. Is that an error?
Oh, I should have put, well, it's 2022 budget modifications.
Correct.
I should not have followed with the 2022 into the date.
I just wanted to make sure
That
that.
is correct.
Okay,
It's
all
tough. It's tough during this time of the year where I'm in 2 years.
Okay.
I'm like, I can't get out of one or the other. But
That's fine.
thank you for
I
that.
just wanted to make sure, because I was
Yes.
trying to follow the numbers and I just didn't want it.
Yes, yes.
Want to make sure that we're good. All
Yes,
right,
yes,
that's it. Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you. I will correct that and forward. Any others? No? Okay, great. Thank you for your time.
I think all the years that you made me a little crazy that you're so conservative, now with prices skyrocketing unexpectedly, pays off.
Yeah.
So we'll see what the auditors say.
This is why Dale is probably one of our most valuable players, but
Oh,
she is.
Got
she
it on
is,
live, recorded and everything. Look at that, Dale.
uh,
No, I think it's tough because when we go to NICOM, we do hear from large and small municipalities, one off year messes you up for like 5. It's not like, oh, I'll put some money. There is no money. It takes you 5 years to course correct 1 year of error. So it's really important. I've always thought we were a little too conservative, but this year when everything's 30 to 40% off, it's gonna be very helpful.
And that's really why being conservative in the public sector, usually it's a good practice. So thank you.
Okay.
Our conservative treasurer. Next, we have Corporation Counsel, also another most valuable player.
Oh,
to
now you're
discuss-
gonna have
now
to
I gotta
say that about everybody.
No, but
Okay.
everybody's great.
That was the.
We all get awards.
Okay.
Everybody gets a trophy. No. Proposed local law regarding open burn.
Okay.
And this is with the revisions that we had discussed last week.
You're mentioning everyone gets a trophy reminded me of AYSO. One of the things I was not a fan of, but that's a whole other issue. Remember forcing my daughter to take the referee's test. And she said, I failed. I said, oh, no, you didn't. Since I was the one who gave the test. But this will be quick because I know we all want to hear the manager's report. Open burn, which we talked about last week, those changes have been made
Okay.
in terms of age and in terms of distance and everything like that. So the proposal would be to have a resolution next week to schedule a public hearing. Public hearing would be May the 3rd. And if all goes well and Sergeant McGovern keeps asking me virtually every day where we are with this, hopefully we'll have it on the books by the end of the month. We're not going to talk about towing tonight because simply is not done yet. Next on chapter 162, I have been talking with Joe Augustinelli about some of the changes that are being made. I have, just so the board knows, looked through most of the codes in the state that deal with the change in the state regs. And as I mentioned last time, the state has now basically changed its code enforcement program to require certain things that were not there before: parking structures, changes with regard to operating permits, things like that. So our current chapter 162 goes up to section 162.65. The revised 162, which I will have for you at a May work session, will be much shorter, probably only about 14 sections. That's because many of the articles that we currently have will be deleted, particularly those that relate to violations of the village code for building violations, because those effectively are all under the state code. And all of our code enforcement officers are state certified, and they can write those code violations. And it will make it easier also when we get into court. A number of the other sections that are within our current code now will be changed to standalone sections, vacant building code, and things like that, because I want to have the housing maintenance code as simply, that's what it is, so that they can look at it, people will know exactly what it is. The state has come up with a model code, which I will say that there are a few municipalities that literally took the model code, turned it into their own code, which means that they did not take out the bold and italics, or they left all the blanks in. So I guess they're going to have to revise. I'm not calling out the town of Van Buren, but I will just mention that that's what they did. What?
They're listening
tell you?
in because I'm sure they are.
I'm sure. Well, they, you and I, we can all go to Chautauqua County. But in any event, the major changes will be with things dealing with building permits, how they're issued, and basically, and the enforcement mechanism. We want to make it very clear that you can start with an order to remedy, but you're not required to go to an order to remedy. You can do an appearance ticket if you want, or you can go directly to court, be it the court over here, over there, or the court in White Plains, if you so choose. But like the zoning text changes, changing one thing in chapter 62 sort of has a cascade effect, because one of the things that this will change will be our unsafe building code. Our unsafe building code, which we are using with the building code folks is very unwieldy. It requires that surveyors be appointed, and it's a whole rigmarole. It can, and many municipalities have essentially cut that way back, so that instead of going through 9 processes, you can go through 2, and you can actually get the property declared as a vacant bill, as a dangerous building or an unsafe building. And at the same time, you can get all those fees that you may have expended as a village charged back, either charged back through a special action in court or charged back through taxes. So those things are going to be changed in there. A few other, things we're doing. What will also be tied into this is that Article 8 of the zoning code, which currently has also sections on building permit, certificate of occupancy, the role of the building inspector, that's all going to be repealed. With the exception that we're going to be keeping the section, the zoning code that deals with penalties, because obviously if you violate the zoning code, you should have penalties. I think that it's currently up to $5,000 a day, potentially. So that will be switched around, and we're doing that. But it's a lot. My thanks to Joe Augustinelli, who talks through many of these things with me, because we don't have to follow the state code exactly, but we have to come pretty close. And we can be stricter than the state. We can't be less strict than the state. And what most, as I said, what most municipalities have done is they have come very close to just about taking what the state does. A few have tweaked it, and some of those tweaks are actually, I think, very beneficial. I think we're going to include some additional definitions which will not differ from what are going to be in the zoning code, so that we will have continuity in those various definitions. But it is my expectation that in May we will have that. One last thing, some of you are on the board when we put into play the group called the Code Board of Appeals. It will be my recommendation that we do away with the Code Board of Appeals. It is one, we haven't had anybody on it in 5 years. 2, it effectively creates an extra level before you can even get yourself potentially into court and delay significant. Someone could come in, basically say, I want to go to the Code Board of Appeals, and basically work on that particular OTR stops. So rather than doing that, and it has really not, I think, since it was passed in 2017, I think there's been one matter that's gone to the Code Board of Appeals. And since that point, we haven't even put people on it. So the thought is that it's sort of one group, one committee, if you want to call it, that we can take off the list and just do that. Other than that, there's just a lot. As you can see, this is our current code, which is getting all redlined and marked up because it's going to match the state code. It'll be there. It will be, from a lawyer saying this, it will be a much simpler thing to read. When I was away 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago in San Francisco, we had dinner with a relative of my wife's who happens to be a nuclear engineer, of all things. And the one thing that he said was that he is responsible, or was responsible, for writing the codes on how you build nuclear power plants. And he said the one issue is that you may not do it deliberately, but if you don't write it clearly and simply, people will get it wrong, particularly when it's in different languages. And these codes we don't have that issue, although we do with people understanding it. So the idea is to make the code from a language perspective as simple as you can. So if someone looks at it, they're going to know, okay, my building permit has to have blank, blank, blank. I have to have these many sections of the these many groups of documents. This is what I have to have. This will all be laid out in the application for the building permit, but in the code, if someone wants to look, they'll know I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. There's a lot of, legalese that's in this stuff, which can come out, doesn't have to be there. It can be a lot simpler. And I think the biggest complaint that I get is that, not only where is it in the code, but where does it really say that in the code, or what does it mean? This will I think it will make it much easier. It won't relieve them all. Someone will always find a gap somewhere. That's what they do. But I think it will make it simpler. Code sections that are 45 pages long don't help anybody. Just, building permit, it's going to say this, certificate of occupancy is going to say this. And your fire inspection, everything will be laid out so that people will know that. And it will allow us, one, to put that to some extent like a cheat sheet on the website, to have something at the building department so people can say, okay, building permit section, I need this, or an operating permit, I need this. And that will, I think, make it easier. So that's the goal, to redo 162. And as I said, what I think will ultimately happen is 162 will probably end up being broken up into about 5 or 6 different chapters, so that each will be done in its own way. The role of the building department in this is monumental, because they have to, this is what they do. They write this, so the code has to work with them. I'm also working with my deputy because she is the prosecutor on these cases. And so, we work on all that together. So this is sort of like the next, if you want to call it the next big thing from upstairs on the second floor where I am. Just to let you know, so that's where it is. I had hoped to have it to you tonight, but there's a lot to read, a lot to put together, a lot to get out. The one thing I am just making sure of when I mentioned to get rid of the articles that deal with building code violations. When I'm referring to building code, I mean, for example, where we have that, the cellar should be free from dampness, so your basement has to look a certain way. I just want to make sure that there is a corollary section in the real property maintenance code, which is the state code. And I'm fairly certain there are. Assuming that's the case, then as I said, all these sections can basically come out. It will make it much easier for our code officers, because what they do now is they write a violation under both the village code and under the state code. It makes the violation pages this big, when in fact they can be this big. And so simplicity is what we're going for. So that's the next stage. Thank you. Any questions?
That's great. If I hear you correctly, I may not be hearing you correctly. You're saying that most municipalities, I'm assuming New York City is not one of them, but most municipalities are following the state?
Yes.
Okay.
If you were to go to,
Now, let me,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mayor. I
so that's
apologize.
a yes.
The answer is
Okay.
yes.
And it's not, it's also the cities like New Rochelle, White Plains, Yonkers, or because they usually do things a little differently when it comes to codes?
The state regs are for cities, towns, and villages.
Okay. Does that also mean that if I am in another community in New York State, because I'm sure it doesn't go to the other states, that there should be more consistency for both builders, developers, like there'll be more consistency amongst the municipality, or does that not affect this? at all?
No, actually, if you were to go to Rybrook, or if you were to go to the town of Celeron all the way upstate, or if you were to go to, St. Lawrence, any of those places, they are virtually all following the model law. And they follow section by section. There are nuances, there are differences. For example, this village currently requires 3 sets of documents to be submitted with an application. The state recommends 2. You can do more if you want, you could, but 2. But the benefit now is that if you go to most municipalities and you look up what it's basically, it's their uniform code provisions, that chapter in most municipalities is almost mirror images across the state with just a few nuances. So yeah, it should make it
That should
easier.
benefit consumers, people who move, because the average person actually doesn't get buried where they're born.
Right.
They actually move typically 7 to 9 years, every 7 to 9 years. So this is helpful, I think, actually, for people who are going from community to community, which is not atypical. That's great. Great. Look how excited you get with this stuff. Look at you.
Well, I don't know, open burning and then this,
What more can one ask for? Okay,
what can I say? But thank you, everybody.
thank you,
I actually
Stuart.
do have a comment.
Yeah, we
so,
didn't go around. It was just me. Go ahead.
So I'm actually, and I'm sure Stuart and Joe and Maddie, you guys are gonna be incorporating that hopefully in the new online portion of our building permit, where it says, here's the steps that you guys need to take, how to do applications. So let me ask you this, because we had conversations about policies, sure. So that becomes a policy, that becomes more, as soon as we put that in the code, does that become part of the law and not a policy anymore?
If we put into the code that 2 sets of documents must be provided with an application, that's the code. That's the code.
So that's because there's obviously, we had conversations in the past, well, the application, it depends, and I'm gonna call it, I'm not gonna call names, I'm gonna call job titles. A building inspector, a planner can come in and say, look, I think I have a better way to do this, and I want to incorporate this in here. So that's a policy making portion for that department. It doesn't really have to reflect on the portion of the zoning code, or it doesn't have to be in anything in writing for that matter. But if we do it in the code, then whoever sits on those chairs have to follow what
Right.
is there.
Correct.
So,
Right.
but can I ask you a silly question? We're not gonna be requiring 2 set of drawings, sure?
The state requires at least 2.
Okay, but we gonna be doing online stuff.
There is a provision in here for online as well. but
Okay.
It does say at least 2. This is from the state.
No, I
rules.
least
2 sets of
disagree. I
construction
don't disagree
documents.
with that. I'm
That's what
just saying, but I've been fighting for the past, I don't know how many years now that we should be going
Well,
online, so.
There will be a provision in there for that as well. The state regulations also provide for remote inspections,
I know.
So,
That
which
they
is-
started that in.
which is something
and
that
from
they can
COVID,
start
yeah.
doing. So
Well, but the folks are looking at this. It's not just you, it's you and the team and everybody, right?
primarily Joe at this
Okay.
point.
All right,
So that's sort of like, I just want to have
Yep.
an understanding of where that goes. And I'm assuming in a few years from now, with new technology, things may change.
Right.
So I'm actually glad to hear from you. You and I had a conversation about the Code Board of Appeals a couple
Right.
weeks back. I'm 100% in support of removing that. It's just, there's no value. Yeah, there's no,
I am too, because I was once on that board.
that's why.
Remember those days?
Oh, my God. We couldn't get a
Everybody
meeting.
okay? Because when we take down a committee, we actually all have to, it's a thing. We have to agree with it. Yeah. I was actually going to turn it to my left and say, what do you guys think? So you've already
No,
answered.
no, I had that
Go
conversation
with-
with Stuart a couple of weeks back
Right.
about
We
that.
couldn't
yeah.
even pick a chairman. Remember? Like,
Well, that also goes to
it's
his thing
horrible.
about time limitations. Okay, I'd like to take like a 5-minute break or so. I mean, I know it's 9:30, but it's also like, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Start at 6:30.
Okay. Well, we started at 6:30. Yes, busy night. Okay. Jamie, you good? We're taking a 5-minute break.
I'm good. We're gonna keep running though,
Okay,
but we can mute.
yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so, if you
5
could,
minutes.
the
It's
young lady in the back.
9:36, 9:35,
Okay.
9:36.
No problem.
Like that. Says yours. Arrangements. Wow, that's pretty. Okay. The only thing left now is your.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Can everyone mute their microphones, please?
Okay, just want to let you know.
Everybody mute their microphones, please. The only thing left is your Q1 and we have a set.
And the special meeting.
Yeah, we have to go back to special meeting to do the 2 resolutions, then you'll go into it. What do you think, Zach? Those are for the McLaren, for the peer review.
Stuart, I can hear you.
of the property.
Jamie, can you just queue up the presentation?
Yes, it's ready to go.
I will never be allowed in the town of Van Buren. That's basically what it is. I'm done. I'm done.
Faces on every.
I saw that. I said, where are all these places?
It's north, right?
Chautauqua County. It's all the way, it's far west, far southwest part of the state. Chautauqua, that's where the Comedy Hall of Fame, Lucille Ball was born in Chautauqua County. It's where Fredonia is, SUNY Fredonia is down there. So it's the far southwest portion of the state.
Catherine, can you please mute the Go TV camera, please?
You can't take 17 any further.
Jamie, I don't know if she's still here. Catherine? Sorry, Jamie's asking if you could mute the,
Oh, okay.
Well, it moves around the state.
she can.
That's a nice
She
place
asked if you
for
could
it.
mute
Yeah.
Jamie? Jamie,
Yes,
you can hear it still, right?
I can. So she just needs to mute the laptop.
She's doing that now.
Okay, just so you know, everyone's muted, but when we go back into session, you have to remind her to turn it back on. But the people at home can hear because this is live.
Okay, sit down.
Did
No names mentioned. Okay. Is this the exciting part of the evening?
I just want to make one correction.
Oh, please.
It's not the town of Van Buren. It's
Oh,
the
no.
Village of Cayuga Heights, but we'll just sort of leave that.
Cayuga.
Man, I could have told you that.
That changes everything.
Yeah.
I don't want someone.
From Van Buren, but Cayuga, they might send us a few bottles of wine.
Jamie, could you please cue up the presentation? Thank you.
So I just want to, is there anybody on the call? 5 participants. So just to get us started, last year we started doing more regular updates than we've had in the past. Everybody does it differently, every mayor, every village manager, but now we're sort of looking at doing quarterly reviews 3 times a year because the last quarter is really all about the budget season. So the village manager is going to run us through year-to-date updates. We'll have questions at the end, I'm sure. I assume this will be posted on the website somewhere.
It already is.
It already is. I should look at the website.
Well, it's with the agenda and we'll post, yeah.
Oh, with the agenda, but it really
So
should
we'll-
have
we'll
its
post,
own.
Yeah, it'll live.
Okay, so very much looking forward to this moment. I kept thinking we should have done this in the beginning, but maybe next time.
All right. Okay. Maddie, do you just want to minimize that other screen? Thank you. Thank you for that. So this is our first quarter 2023 presentation of projects underway as well as projects that we're going to be specific to the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, otherwise known as the DRI. So if you could go through the next slide, please. So we have quite a few projects underway that are really just various projects that some we've been working on longer than others, but these are all things that are essentially some are basically in the pipeline, some are midway through, and some are nearing completion. So one of the projects that we've been working on, next slide, please. We've been working on the 30 Water Street mixed-use housing development. This is an all-affordable housing development down at 30 Water Street, which is on the east side of the tracks. And this was a village-owned site, organic waste yard that now is soon to be developed into 109 units of affordable housing, all affordable. It will have retail space and it will have a community space. It is a brownfield, which means that the site has been contaminated through prior use. A long time ago, it was a coal tar factory for Con Edison. We are actually meeting with Con Edison and the developer and the DEC to talk about the next steps for the remediation of that site, which will be done in coordination between the Con Edison and the developer. So
I'm going to just interject as we go through this, not with questions, but clarity for people who will then look at this and then quote or take things out. Contamination is up and down the Hudson Valley. It's not unique to Ossining. It is very common. There was a lot of industry on the Hudson. So I just want to make sure it's not an Ossining issue. It's this property, but it is up and down the Hudson River. I'm sure it's more than the Hudson River, but it's very typical because of the industry. Secondly, the meeting with Con Ed is the board will be present, obviously, staff, of course, will be there. There will be lots of people at this meeting, but also Bob Fritchie and Omar Lopez, will also be there to have the electeds represented as well as village staff. I just want to interject for anybody that follows this or will take information
of
from this.
course, and that is all true. The next project that we are sort of midstream or getting started on, I wouldn't say quite midstream, but close, is the redevelopment, a reconfiguration of the Five Corners intersection, which is Spring Street, Main Street, Brandon Street, and Central Avenue, right in the heart of our downtown, is being upgraded to become safer and more pedestrian friendly. So right now, the electrical work is going in for the signaling. We're waiting for the signaling posts. As soon as the signaling posts are in, which should take probably a little bit of time, we will complete the work. So this looks like we're on track to have the work completed this fall. This was done with grant funding. We received an $850,000 state municipal grant through former Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff. And we'll be matching the total cost of the project, which is a little over $1 million, with our state aid money that is for the CHIPS program, which is basically a state-funded paving program that municipalities can take advantage of. Next slide, please. Okay, my slides are in the wrong order, but that's okay. I'm reading them. So Project Mover, no, go, that's fine. Project Mover is our e-bike infrastructure grant, and we were thanks in large part to Maddie Zahash, who spearheaded this, and the mayor was very involved. We are starting, just had our second kickoff meeting. We've had a few core team meetings to work on this. It is being run by a consultancy group that is looking at how we are going to roll out e-bikes so that we can provide access to e-bikes for people at all different income levels, so we can maximize utility of usage of e-bikes and use them as an alternative way to get around the village, which is quite hilly. So an e-bike would be very, very helpful. And they will be coming to the board probably May with a meeting. So we will have the consultants here, and staff will be talking about Project Mover. That'll be the first of many public engagement initiatives around this project that will help shape what e-bikes are going to look like in Ossining, how they'll be distributed, where chargers will be located, and a whole bunch of other things. Is there anything you'd like to add, Maddie, that I may be missing?
Thank you, Karen. I just wanted to add one thing, but it's sort of an important thing. Project Mover, including some of our consultants coming from Boston, from Buffalo, are going to be with us at Earth Day. They're actually going to be working with Pedigo, which is an e-bike store in Croton, to sort of push out the message. And I know, one of the things that's come up a couple times, besides just how to operate the bike safely when you're actually using it, is how to store and charge it safely. So that's something that, we're going to have some engagement around. And then just sort of remind everybody that this project is coming very soon, working with our community partners at Neighbors Link, Hudson Link, IFCA, and Open Door. So get ready to see these folks out there at Earth Day with their own table this year.
So if I may just insert, instead of having the Project Mover with that piece, I think it's important in that box on the left. I know I saw this already, but the box on the left to actually put our partners in there, because it really
Yes.
shows. And like, instead of the building, I know that that's something the consultants use. Additionally, because it's always about what does this actually do? The sort of unspoken piece of that about this that I keep forgetting, but I think it needs to be mentioned. We're a bit of an incubator here. It came from our consultants who are looking at parking, but I think that we're also an incubator that we should always name the other 4 municipalities that will benefit if and when this works. It's not 100% sure everything will fall in place. We're a bit of an incubator, and I think that's a good thing for Ossining to be, but also the names of the municipalities who will get grants to then continue the work. So it's a regional project, and then maybe the rest of New York State. That it's bigger than like Ossining getting e-bikes, which people keep asking me about. It's so
That
much
is
bigger than that.
Really, a really good information to include. So not only do we have municipalities, it's Croton, Peekskill, Tarrytown,
The town of, and the town.
and the town of Ossining. Dobbs Ferry, I'm sorry. And the town of Ossining, of course. So we will be, once we see things, we'll be able to work with these communities. If it works out well, as things work out well, there'll be more justification and more opportunity to spread this even further. So it has more impact as a real mitigation for carbon use. And reduction of greenhouse gases, which we'll get to later in the presentation. So that's a really an important point. Thank you, Mayor, as well as our nonprofit partners, which are IFCA, Neighbors Link, and Open Door. So, and Hudson Link. That's right. That's right. So we have 4 partners and 4 municipalities, 4 nonprofit partners who will help with the education of how to use the bikes, how to distribute the bikes, and make sure that we have a really equitable share of bike usage. So
And we'll be compensated for that work also through the
yes,
grant.
yes, they are receiving funding through this grant too. So that's very important. Next slide, please. So continuing with our greenhouse gas reduction efforts, solar roofs and canopies are something that we're working on. So we'll have our first solar roof installation completed very, very soon at the Central Garage Solar Roof, Central Garage rather, and that is that is a solar roof. It's been installed. It's almost we're pretty close to have it up and running, and that will help provide low-income residents of our community with a 10% discount on their energy costs. And subsequently, we're also working on this on a similar project, but this is a canopy down at the train station on the east side of the tracks. And this is, we're already starting planning for this, but we'll start building this probably the fall of 2023. And that will be this will be a larger site. This will also be providing residents with who qualify with a subsidy for their, you'll discount their energy use by 10%. So we're excited about this. And then this project, I think it's important to know we're being done. It's a partnership with the New York Power Authority and public-private partnership with consultants who are, or solar firms, solar companies that are doing the installation. The cost to Ossining is nothing. The benefit is not only will we be using solar renewable energy, we will be providing a cost benefit to our lowest income residents. We'll also get a slight revenue every year of almost $10,000 a year for the next 25 years or more. So again, something that we're doing, that we're taking advantage of, a program that we really are expending, other than staff time, very little in terms of funding. So
I do
Back
think,
up.
while not always mentioned, but these panels actually protect all the commuters' cars from snow, sleet, rain. It's actually a weather, and it makes the surface last much longer because it doesn't have all the weather elements that it normally would have, whether it's the sun in the summer or the freezing rain, etc. I know it's not the reason we did it, but it actually helps everybody's cars last a little bit longer.
it's another added benefit. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about traffic patterns and parking and other issues tonight. One of the projects that Ossining has been talking about for quite some time now is becoming a reality. We have been awarded a federal grant to design and construct the Route 9 road diet, which is a term that's used, sort of a term that's used, but what that many people might be a little bit find it a little bit misleading, but really it's the narrowing of the road. So Route 9, where it's currently 4 lanes of traffic from Cedar Lane and North Island to Cedar Place on South Island, will be narrowed to 1 lane in each way. This is the way it was prior to urban renewal. So the idea that this would be narrowed, it would provide additional parking, and it would calm traffic. And again, aid Ossining in becoming more walkable, more pedestrian friendly, more bike friendly. So we have issued a design RFQ for this project, and that will allow us to hire a design expert design engineers who can look at this, construct it. We'll be working closely with the Department of Transportation on this, who is implementing the grant on behalf of the federal government. And we'll hope to see designs and more community engagement around this. So we'll keep people apprised of what this means and what the implications are. Probably with construction starting next year. And then once that's done, we would have reconfigured the road with the benefit of slower, calmer traffic, parking on either side, which is good for the stores and the shops, and also for the community center, because it's going to run right past there. We already had a parking premium there. So we'll see activation of certain districts, more viability for certain stores along that route that have struggled because of lack of parking, offsetting of parking on some of the ancillary side streets. We'll be able to add more on-street parking, I'm sorry. And we're looking forward to repositioning the road the way it was prior to urban renewal. So that is a project we're working on. We were funded quite a bit of money. So essentially close to $4 million was the grant. It's based on the actual cost of the project. So up to $4 million, we're anticipating the project will come in a little under that at $3.9 million. And I'm sorry, at $4.9 million. We're getting funded almost $4 million and we have a match of 20% of the total project cost. So that will be on the village, thanks to our very conservative savings to be able to execute these projects. Next slide, please. So CDBG is the Community Development Block Grant, and this is administered through the federal government. Well, it's funded through the federal government, and we're part of a consortium where the money is administered through the county. So the goal of these projects is CDBG overall is to provide low and moderate income communities with more community benefits, more funding for things within their community. So streetscaping, and again, this plays to walkability and safety, improving ADA accessibility, as well as just creating greater accessibility to our resources in our downtown area. We have several projects that have been funded over a multi-year period by the Community Development Block Grant Program. So we'll be starting on James Street, which is going to be starting pretty soon, spring, probably within the next 2 months. That would be James Street from Route 9 to State Street. And the total cost of this project is $800,000. We'll be getting grant funding of $400,000 from this project, and we'll also be using our paving money for this year too, to repave the street in conjunction with that streetscaping. Spring Street, which runs perpendicular to James Street, or sort of crosses James Street. Our phase, we have been approved for phase 1 funding to do the same thing again, redo the sidewalks, make them safer, as well as improving ADA accessibility. We've been funded $549,000. I'm sorry, the total cost is $549,200, and we've been funded $200,000 for that project, which will probably combine with paving through our paving budget. And we're hoping to get funding for phase 2. That'll be done in 2024, and we're hoping to get funding for phase 2, which would continue this. Phase 1 would be from Broad Avenue to Lafayette Street. Phase 2 would be from Lafayette Street to Rockledge Avenue. And hopefully we can do the whole Spring Street corridor from Broad Avenue down to almost the Arcadian Shopping Plaza. So next slide, please. We also got Community Development Block Grant money for a inclusive playground at Nelson Sitting Park. And if you remember, we have just completed a playground installation of a inclusive playground that's designed to provide children of all abilities to be able to enjoy our recreational activities in a new way. So we have just completed a project very similar to that at Vets Park. This would be replacing the playground equipment at Nelson Sitting Park. And this total project cost is $188,750, and we're getting grant funding of $94,000. And we anticipate this will probably start in 2024. Next slide, please. We've been working on a firehouse consolidation study. And as many of you know, we have quite a few older firehouses in Ossining. Many of them were around before there were actually trucks. There were actually horses used to fight fires. So they're older, and making sure that they are maintained is not only expensive, but making sure that they have the safety requirements that today's first responders needs is also something we're very committed to. So we're in the process of completing a study to really assess which firehouses would most likely be able to be sold or repurposed in some way, and where we could potentially build a new firehouse that would incorporate all of the safety features that, again, today's first responders need. So we're wrapping up that study, which will be presented to the board sometime in May as well at a work session. we received grant funding for this project too, $18,750 of grant funding for a project that was a little over $60,000. And I just want to recognize the work that Maddie Zahich has done on this, as well as Trustee Fritchie, who's done a yeoman's job of making sure that we have all all 9 companies and all 7 houses participating with a large share of a voice. I would say that's a community engagement initiative, well, in itself. And I think we've been able to hear from everybody. So we thank you for that. And I don't know if Maddie or Trustee Fritchie, if there's anything you want to add?
Basically, we'll hear from them in May.
Okay. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of activity on our waterfront. And this year, we're going to be completing a study that really was a follow-up to the Cornell Adaptive Design Study that we did a few years ago in conjunction with the town. And that study, we were able to work with landscape architect students, graduate students from Cornell University, who provided a range of options that we could do to design our waterfront to mitigate sea level rise, and really innovative, wonderful things, some feasible, some maybe not so feasible, including raising the tracks for Metro North and things like that, that maybe we don't have as much site control over. But the follow-up of that study, we received another $125,000 subsequent to that study, again, working in conjunction with the town to look at things that we could actually implement in the near term. So this study will again be completed soon and presented to the public. Really talks about different things we can do now in terms of planting and different things we can do to mitigate sea level rise by using living shorelines that are more adaptive. So really exciting projects, and we're glad to be working, because we share our waterfront with the town of Austin. We're glad to be working with them on this project. We also received a $50,000 Hudson River Estuary grant to create a riverfront resilience plan. And that will include resilience visioning strategies, and continue on with the work that we're doing through the CAD study and this more recent study with the town. And this will also incorporate the north end of Lewis Engle Park, and this is north of Lewis Engle Park and Gordine Park. So it really focuses more where Westerly Marina is and Chatham Yacht Club, to again continue things that we can do to reduce the impact of sea level rise. That project will probably be starting summer of 2023. And more recently, we were awarded a local waterfront revitalization program planning grant of $106,250 to incorporate recent planning initiatives, including the 2021 comprehensive plan and our 2022 downtown revitalization initiative plans and strategic investment plan and projects, so that we can build on that and update these plans and use this to work in conjunction to update our comprehensive plan, in a sense, to address that local waterfront area, which extends actually quite far beyond the waterfront. It really goes all the way up into Route 9. But this really is another way we can look at this more closely to make sure that we're doing all we can to build sustainably, develop things with resiliency in mind. So a lot of things going on at the waterfront right now, because we're doing so many other projects at this time. We'll probably start this, have a little bit of a delayed start to this project, so probably 2024. But by that time, we should have a lot of our DRI projects underway, as well as some other things. But it'll be a good time to really then refocus on the waterfront in terms of planning. Next slide, please. Another sustainability initiative that we're working on is a county-wide project. The county was funded $100,000 through New York State DEC to do an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. We are part of that study along with several other communities. And this is again, a regional approach, and each community is tasked. There's no cost to the communities. The share for this is based on staff time. So while it does require a fair bit of staff time, it's a pretty intensive study where we're really looking at the village comprehensively. The village and town is involved too, to assess our greenhouse gas emissions based on things that we can measure. So the energy that we're using in our buildings, creating a baseline for that, looking at our fleet, looking at how much garbage the town creates over a period of time, establishing a base time, and then creating a community action plan that would identify strategies so we can mitigate those greenhouse gas emissions and ultimately lower them, and do it not just for Ossining, but countywide. So again, a lot of things we're doing on the sustainability front. Next slide, please. Our biggest project, and perhaps a project that's been in planning for right now the longest time, is the Indian Brook Water Treatment Plant. We are going out to bid. We have a few final things to tie up with the state of New York to ensure the grant funding that we do have for the project already. But we anticipate getting that final paperwork to the state at the end of this week. And then hopefully within the next month, the state will be back to us and we'll be able to go out to bid for an 8-week bidding cycle. And then we'll have hopefully an array of good, efficient bids that we can go to finally start this project. This is the pre-bid estimate for this project is $68 million. It is not an inexpensive project, but it is a vital project. It is a project that makes sure that we will have fresh drinking water for many, many, many years to come. It helps us protect our existing reservoir, the Indian Brook Reservoir. We get about, on average, 25% of our water, and the remaining part of our water, the balanced, or I guess the larger portion of our water, 75% is coming from the Croton Reservoir, which we purchase that water from New York State. So maintaining our reservoir, making sure that if we have to, we can use it more, is going to be a very important thing as we look at water resources going forward. And we hear stories all about the country, how people haven't really planned well about their water resources. We are trying to plan as carefully as we can going forward. The reason for this new plant is our current plant is at the end of its useful life. It's a 40-year-old plant. And right now it really has to be upgraded to meet capacity issues for now and the future, as well as to ensure that we can mitigate contamination from algae blooms that we've seen more recently, as well as meet government standards that are becoming much stricter on contaminants, as they should, such as copper and lead. So we are being proactive. We are doing all we can, and we're also doing all we can on the grant side. Right now, we have about a little over $3 million to offset the cost of the plant, but the plant is expensive. And we have been we had a meeting with the EFC this week to talk about grant opportunities and what we may or may not be able to qualify for. We're working on that. We're also going to be lobbying our state senators, our state representatives, for money that's coming in through the infrastructure, federal infrastructure monies that are flowing through the state. Hopefully, given the amount of development that Ossining's doing, the socio-demographics, our community, and the fact that we're very proactive on this issue, we're hoping that we can benefit to justify the expense that the state is already putting into almost over $20 million into the revitalization of Ossining. For that to be successful, we need the infrastructure to support it as well. So we're hopeful that we will continue to get additional funding to offset the impact on our water ratepayers, which again, we're trying to minimize. Let me not scare anybody. We're working to keep them where they are. But and again, thanks to conservative planning, we are confident that we'll be able to do a good job of that. Next slide, please. So in addition to these projects, which when I put this list together, I didn't think there were that many, but it turns out there's more than I realized. We also have our very specific downtown revitalization initiative projects. These are funded with a $10 million grant that we received 2 years ago from the state of New York. We've gone through a pretty intense planning process with them, and now we're getting ready for the execution of the projects that the state has identified as most viable of the total projects that we had put forth a few last year. So Probably the biggest and most impactful project, we'll talk about is the redevelopment of Main Street. We also have some other things that we're doing for the community center, as well as some other projects that are sponsored by non-village entities, such as the Olive Opera House, which is run by the Fan family, and the Lewis Angle Park Performance Space. So more specifically, next slide, please. Market Square development is really re-envisioning what the center of our Main Street and Spring Street intersection looks like, the heart of our downtown. And this was another area that was essentially decimated during urban renewal and was never restored to what it could be. So the state has identified $2 million will go to the development of a open plaza. So where we have our Market Square right now, where we have our farmers market every Saturday, we have $2 million in funding to redesign that area and make it even more inviting, more engaging, and more useful for many different activities throughout the year in a what we're hoping to be a very spectacular and unique public plaza that will certainly identify in terms of placemaking for Ossining. It will be a go-to destination. So for all of the DRI projects, we're going to start planning in 2023 within the next couple of months. And construction, we anticipate, though, construction for this project will probably start in 2026, which will be while we will be doing the planning for these projects simultaneously so that they inform each other. We have to stage them because we will be replacing surface parking that exists there now. And the first step is addressing that, then doing some mixed use development, which I'll talk about, and as well as then finally creating the public plaza. There will be a lot of public engagement around all of these projects. We are planning on starting next month with a series of public engagement webinars, and we'll be present at the farmers market on certain Saturdays. We'll be doing walking tours. The board will be involved in educating people. We'll be out there in every way, shape, or form we can to get as many people. And we're hoping that the newly formed placemaking committee is helpful in that as well. So right across the street, next slide, please. Right across the street from Market Square, we have what is now the parking lots that are adjacent to the post office at the corner of Spring Street and Main Street. This has been identified for a mixed-use development. This is not funded out of the DRI, but was contingent. It was a development that was contingent on us being able to get the funding for the redevelopment of Market Square, as well as the parking structure that I'll talk about in a minute that will replace the surface parking we currently have. So the idea here is, again, informed by the public. This is just a rendering on the side, but we want to, the board has selected Wilder Balter St. Catherine Group, two developers who will be working together on this project, which will include residential, a mix of residential and retail, as well as probably other amenities that haven't been identified yet, to look at. It will replicate what we're already doing. It will follow the form-based codes, replicate what's already on Main Street in terms of historic look and feel, which may not be as evident in this picture, but will be in the final project. It will follow the form-based codes that were already established for that area. So we're looking forward to a lot of public engagement about what this looks like, how this works to activate the street, and how this works to, again, establish the street in line with the way it was pre-urban renewal, but again, with a recognition for open space, for green space, for community gathering. So right now, again, we'll be looking to do the community engagement and working with the developer on that, so that they can develop their plans and initiate the planning process. We'll start that this year. Construction on that probably, though, won't start till 2025 or 2026. All of this, next slide, requires that we do something about the parking. And while we all have visions of a future where we're less reliant on parking and less reliant on cars, so we don't need parking, for the foreseeable future, we're going to need something. And the state has actually, it's a total through 2 grant funding stream, an Empire State Grant, as well as the DRI. We have a total of $3 million, $3,243 million to construct a multimodal transportation hub that will provide parking, EV charging, e-bike rentals, and for and also it will be designed for longer term to be able to transition should our use for these things become less in the longer term future. This structure will be built on the Brandreth lots behind Open Door and Main Street Deli right now. And it will create greater access and activation of the Croton Aqueduct and the Sing Sing Hill Greenway. It's actually in a really great position to draw people. So visitors to Austin can theoretically park and rent a bike and ride. And they can also, this is the nexus of the Croton Aqueduct, the double arches, and the Sing Sing Hill Greenway. So in terms of placemaking, that's the trifecta. So we're hoping that we really are able to do this in a dynamic way with solar roof and decarbonization strategies built into it. This will be the first project that we'll have to build, because without this, we can't do the work on the other 2 sites. But again, all of this will be informed with significant public engagement. Next slide, please. There you go. Okay. Our community center, which is also in the heart of our community, and that's sort of the nexus of our main historic attractions here. It is a great community center. We run fabulous programs and it is used all the time, but it's a little staid and a little dated, and we need to make sure that we're optimizing that space so that we can run even better programs and do it more efficiently. So not only efficiently in terms of the types of programs, the number of programs, and the number of people we can accommodate, but environmentally more efficiently as well, because the decarbonization aspects of this are an important part of this grant and will be figured into the design of this site. So we have $2.5 million in Downtown Revitalization Initiative grant to redesign the interior space, use it a lot better, create dedicated space for our youth bureau, as well as enhance the space that we use currently for senior programs, as well as our art room, our music room. All these things make them as functional as possible, as beautiful as possible, and as flexible as possible to accommodate the many different interests that we have in our community, as well as the wide range of people served from birth to seniors. There's something for everybody at the community center. We also currently, though, are underway with work for, and we just awarded the bid for the pool, and that is going to be funded in part by a $500,000 state municipal grant, also provided by the former Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff. And this will go to resurfacing the pool as well as redoing the locker rooms and creating a family locker room. That work is getting started now, and we hope to have, it should be completed by the end of 2023, the pool and locker room, and we'll be starting on the design phase of the rest of the center in the meantime. Next slide, please. Again, we've talked about streetscaping a lot. So we also have some streetscaping money for Station Plaza, which is on the east side of the tracks. And this visual shows the intersection of Main Street and Water Street with $857,000 of DRI funding. We will be able to beautify Station Plaza, this neighborhood, and its businesses through improved streets, widen sidewalks, ADA accessibility, and placemaking. And we'll coordinate with these improvements with the 30 Water Street development that is right adjacent to that. So if you were going down here just a little bit to your right, north of Station Plaza, as we do the 30 Water Street affordable mixed use development, and they need to do their road renovations there, we'll tie this all in together. So we really have a nice contiguous look that builds nicely on everything and really maximizes the funding that we're getting from the DRI along with what the developer is doing. So this will help support local businesses in the neighborhood. It'll again create a much more beautiful area on Station Plaza, which is the entry to our village if you're arriving by train. So we're really excited about that project too. And we're looking forward to working with the community, especially the local community right in that immediate area on that project. Next slide, please. So the 4 projects I just discussed are projects that the village will receive DRI funding for, that are sponsored by the village and the village will execute. The next 2 projects are projects that are where the money is actually going to different entities. So the owners of the Olive Opera House received $1.5 million in DRI funding to renovate this historic building. They want to create flexible workspaces, studios for tenants, and along with performance space and exhibition spaces. And they currently are housing Hudson Valley Books for Humanity, and they will soon be housing Sing Sing Prison Museum, which will be launching its preview center there. The additional funding is going to, again, complement the other things that are going around, right, immediate area, because this is also at the 5 corner intersection, right near the Market Square developments that we spoke about as well. So I believe they are, going further, we'll be doing similar things to what we're doing on our projects. And I would assume you'd look to see them start construction next year sometime. The next project, next slide, please, is Lewis Engel Waterfront Park Performance Space. So the town was awarded the town of Ossining was awarded $600,000 to redo the stage area for the Lewis Engel Park and really make it I think that the real key here is to take what's currently there and amplify it and make it more of a attractive state-of-the-art performance space, along with new bathrooms down there for attendees. And this would be yet another opportunity for placemaking that's in Ossining, because no one really knows that we have a town park and a village park down there. We just think they're all Ossining's great parks. So it'll really be wonderful to have our concert series as well as all the other things that we do down there in a stage that can maybe doesn't have to shut down immediately in like, slightly inclement weather, and can provide the sound quality and other things you need to have a wide range of artists and performers want to come and play there. So that really concludes the number of projects that we have going on right now. There are, of course, our day-to-day projects and all the other things we do on a regular basis on top of that. But those summarize that really the cumulative efforts of this board and the things that they've prioritized for the community, and that the staff has then taken on in terms of providing support to execute them.
Thank you. I would actually number them instead of bullet them on the first page and continue the numbers. I think as we update, it'll be easier to see how many by seeing numbers next to them.
No problem.
And I would also, this is just minor details. We've discussed all these projects, but I think I'm assuming that 3 months from now, you'll have whatever advances. Not everything advances every 3 months. Some of these are 3-4 year projects, but certainly if anything new happens, it'll be updated, set up that it looks like it could be done that way.
Yeah, I just want to add too, because we've been talking about a story map, and this is definitely the projects that will populate the map. So all that's missing here really is the map and a few other things that we're trying to incorporate in the story map. That's being worked on now. So with largely a lot of content sourced from this presentation, we'll be having an interactive story map that will really give you a feel of where everything's happening, and we'll be able to keep updated in real time. So you'll be able to look at it and know at any given point in time what stage we're at with the various projects.
So that'll be online?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, questions, comments, thoughts, applause, exhaustion,
Applause. I definitely have applause.
or
That's a lot.
exhaustion, whichever suits you. Anybody?
I just, a multimodal.
Modal.
The e-bikes. want to make sure that we're leaving the path of safety, charging, yet another fatality.
Bob, can you please put your microphone on?
Sorry,
Thank you.
just want to make sure that we're leading the way as far as safety and in the utmost way, because yet another fatality in New York due to an e-bike Monday. It concerns us on the department side.
Absolutely.
So that's, everything else is just, great job. It's,
Thank you. But the e-bike safety is something we talk about with the Project Mover team, as well as with the state when we're talking about the projects that we're putting forth that would have e-bike charging. So it's obviously a big concern. We can't have, that much of an investment in a project that's,
I will be attending 2 seminars out west about lithium ion and bikes and cars and
wonderful.
stuff.
Great.
Bob, was it the battery that was the problem in the bike,
It's,
in the fatality?
problem
or
is
was it
these people are just bringing them in the buildings and they're charging them. They're not paying attention to them.
Yeah.
And
They explode.
they're just, it's a chain reaction. Just like with an e-car, you can't put it out.
Okay, anybody else?
Thank you, Karen. I think this is something that I've mentioned before in whether it's the story map. I think it starts to head in this direction, but making a presentation, like a version of this presentation, available in Spanish as well, I think would be really valuable. I'd be happy to work with you to make something like that happen, because there are whole hosts of folks in our community that may not be able to engage with it in this way, and they should know what's going on too. So I'd be happy to partner with you on that.
Thank you.
Muy bien. De nada.
Anyone else? Comments, questions, thoughts?
I do. Thank you. So I guess a little bit more of if we're gonna be using this to develop the map and the storyline that we have. My 2 cents, I guess, on the graphic portions, I like a lot what you guys did in some of the slides in regards to the project costs. And then when if it's grant funding or for state chips, it's like, I'm looking at the 5 corners, for me, it was very clear. It's like, what are we spending? What are we getting? What is paying for it? Obviously there's a couple of the other projects. Is the other one, the solar panels, is a project cost $0. Very clear. I just think it needs to be consistent throughout the slides, and it's not right now. So, more like in a graphic way for me to kind of see that. I do have other questions in regards to where was that one? The $7 million for the e-bikes. How much is Austining getting?
Yeah, so that's a little, we probably have to clarify that a little bit
This is
more.
a little complicated because this is one of 2 grants that were on the list that the manager just presented, where we are the beneficiary of the action, but the money is actually not passing through us. So the $7 million is one, and then the $125,000 for the shoreline
Right.
improvements that we got with the town was actually awarded to the contractor who used us as their test case. So I just want to, make that caveat. As far as how much of the infrastructure and how many of the bikes are going to come to the village of Austining proper, that number has not yet been determined. It seems as though, since we're going to be sharing ultimately with the other 4 incubator communities, that we're probably going to get, based on our population, more than 1/5, obviously, because we have the biggest population. As for exactly how many, that is not something that's been determined yet. This planning process is going to continue and evolve. I think when we worked with the folks from Hudson Link, who were actually in charge of sort of going out and scouting locations for the bike libraries and for charging stations, I think that information is kind of going to be brought forward into this next phase of the planning process, that it's going to say, okay, we've identified 50 places in Austining, which 20 makes sense, and then sort of try to back into that number from there. So I don't have a crystal clear answer. I don't think we know.
Which I think it's fine, but I think, because this is one one of many projects that I have been asked is like, are you really guys gonna spend $7 million in e-bikes? You know, so, but that's the
Yes,
part that the
it's-
community, when I see this $7 million is like, what are we getting for $7 million? So I think we have to be a little more
I
clear
agree.
on that.
Yeah, I
So-
agree. And it's a little bit, part of the challenge is trying to explain it and to do
course.
it
No, no,
concisely, but
believe
you're
me, no.
absolutely right. We don't
Not
want to
just
be
thinking,
misleading.
oh, $7 million is gonna be shared among
Well,
this
not only
community.
that,
That's a good
I'm
point.
sure that Austining, like the headline says, every grant is, we get it one way, we get strings attached, but we get it, like in
Well,
some.
matching, are we getting
This
any
we
matching? I
actually
mean,
don't get 7 million. Nobody's giving us a check for $7 million and we don't control it.
And we're
So-
not even sure, like,
What part
we,
is
we
ours?
need to know, like that because this money, like of that 7 million, what's soft cost and what's hard
of
cost.
course, but that's what I'm saying. I
Yeah,
think we, you know, again,
So,
the
yeah.
title, it says $7 million.
Yeah.
And I think try to find a simple way
Yeah,
to
yeah.
clarify this. That's all.
I also
you know.
don't think you need that many pictures, but I mean, to your point, instead of like Project Mover, we don't need, we're on our way. And I understand that this was put together from other things. Otherwise, all we're doing is creating decks, which is not what we should all be doing. But the 7 million should almost go to the bottom right hand in a small print because it looks like $7 million grant is the headline. That's actually not the headline. We're an incubator.
Yep.
That's the headline. And we will get X, Y, and Z out of that, that benefits the community, et cetera. So I think that's very important.
And so I'm gonna go to the other slide. Yeah, so the CDBG streetscape portion of it that we have. And I get asked, because I live in Spring Street, when are we repaving the road? But on this one, just bear with me. We only doing sidewalks,
So for the streetscaping, it's the sidewalks.
correct?
But likely what we'll do is try to do, if all things go according to plan, like for James Street, we're gonna be able to pave too. So even though the CDBG is specific for sidewalks, we'll do is tie it with our paving budget so that we'll be able to do the paving.
We
too.
should, I mean, I know it's not clear, but I think we should say that as well, along with
Once you're
this,
sure. Once you're sure.
of course.
Is,
yeah.
so, again,
Yeah.
this is, I think once we get it in the story map, and this is all really helpful to
Yeah,
make
and
sure we
then it
get
will
it.
be, like you said, it will be
Yeah.
updates, and,
Yeah,
You'll
you can
find a
always
way to
update
do
that.
it. You'll do it in color, you'll do it in a box, you'll say since the last one and update as of.
yeah.
But these are the updates, like, oh yeah, we're gonna do the streets as well as sidewalks. That's. the
Yeah,
real
I
update,
guess
you know.
we want to, that is the plan,
I-
but we want to make sure we don't overpromise. and
Yeah, I
underdeliver.
also want to be very clear, the reason we're doing this, we're gonna do this quarterly, 3 times a year. We're not updating this every month. There was a time when we said, let's update. It's too much work. Like, we're gonna take this input. Some of these things might be able to be edited now, but every quarter, we're gonna get a report about progress. I think it's better it's also better for us. There are 2 or 3 people that call me all the time. Where are we with this? Where are we with this? And my answer is going to be, here is the update for the quarter. We'll get you another one next quarter. I just don't think it's the best use of time. Like, it feels like quarterly is probably a good amount of time. for information.
Unless something big changes.
Well, something huge, of course. Something gets taken off, something gets added, of course.
So let me just go back. I'm gonna try to go through some of the slides that I had questions on it. So the other one that I had questions on, and I know you said it that you guys are meeting this week, the 14th,
Friday.
which is Friday,
Friday.
sure. So more or less, and here you said breaking ground 2023. That's being very optimistic, I'm assuming.
Well, I guess theoretically, if they're breaking ground, I'm considering the remediation to be the first
So
step.
that
of
would
the
be
bridge.
Con Ed, breaking ground. Okay.
Well, it might be both because they have to, so Balter, the developer has to take like,
I
so
know what they
they'll
had to do to
probably,
do the
they'll
remediation.
they'll
Yeah,
probably
no, no.
be doing it. So when I say breaking ground, I'm being very literal about, hopefully we'll see that ground will be broken. But the development, once it starts to go, that's ballpark of when it should be completed. So we'll, if we have to update that a little bit, maybe it is
Yeah,
a
I
little
think so.
ambitious.
And obviously we'll get a better understanding on Friday, more or less. and
Well,
what
that's
the
what I'm
meeting was.
hoping, yeah.
Refresh my memory. I know they have all the approvals. Do they have building permit? Or they have submitted anything for building?
No, they can't get the building permit till we resolve.
We resolve the,
This.
gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Uh, So the community center, we talked about part of the $2 million and we talked about pretty much what you guys are, what we're doing right now with the pool and everything else. And part of the DRR money is going through the $2.5 million more or less, plus additional money that we got. So my question to you is, have you started engaging or go to get an architect to do these other phases of the community center?
No, what we're working on now, and we're working on the state with this because we can go out and do, because that was an issue whether we had to actually do a bidding process or could do an RFP. So we can go through our procurement process for design services, which would be through an RFP and RFQ for design services. But we're working with them on specific language that needs to be in those RFPs because so I would say we haven't gone out yet for any design services on any of these projects yet, but within the next, we'll be coming to you with resolutions to go out for RFP on the design aspects of the various projects within the next month or two.
Yeah, because that's helpful because when you say 23, 25, it's
Yeah.
a big,
And that one too is where we might, you maybe have your total project is more fungible there because you may or may not. So that's again why a little bit of why we have the inconsistencies because we're still waiting for pieces of information on certain projects. But
Oh, all right. The streetscape at Station Plaza, you mentioned 30 Water Street, but we really don't know what 30 Water Street is.
so maybe we'll add another year. Okay, I'm going to add another year to everything because we know it's true. No matter how many times I think I'm
But
planning
hold on,
conservatively.
But so my question, it wasn't really too much about 30 Water Street. It was more for the solar panels that we are putting literally around the corner from this area. So what is tying these two projects? Forget about, like I said, forget about 30 Water Street, because that could be something later on. This, we can do it depending on the funding and everything else. It's totally separate. They're not, but
Yeah.
what happens on the parking lot and the solar panels, that kind of affects what we can do as a streetscape, correct? Sort of,
so-
kind of. We have to
well-
connect it. We have to connect those two somehow.
So I think like the solar panels are going to be very specific, like we lay them out and they're very specific over the existing
Sure.
parking spaces. So I don't think there'll be like
They don't, no, but you have to complement them. They're not.
Right, so.
together,
so
but
in
you have to
terms of
complement
looking
them
at that,
within
because
one,
you wouldn't
yeah.
have the same vista right now that you
course.
have in that drawing. So
Yeah.
I think it's things we can talk about on what we can do. And I'll make sure that I talk to Paul too about what his thoughts are on that so that we make sure we connect that dot. But that's a really good point of how we, tie that in as well, which I think will be a help to the newer businesses that are down there. They'll appreciate that a
And
lot.
I think that's what you want to do. You want to accomplish all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think
'cause
that's a great idea.
I don't know, like I said, but I did hear that some people, some of the few businesses are sort of newer there. There were concerns about, I'm trying to make this, now you guys are gonna put this whole solar panel system that is gonna block all my view.
We talked to them about it today, as a matter of fact. We were down there for something else.
was there today.
Yeah, Paul brought it up. He's like, aren't you guys so excited about these solar panels? And they were like, well, we love solar, but we're working with
Figure
them.
it out.
We'll figure something out.
And hopefully we're working with them on some other things too that are helpful. So.
And the other one, I'll talk to the town about that. That's their project. So that's the waterfront. That's has nothing to do with us. So that's just.
Well,
some
we
of my
can all go to
general
their public
comments.
hearing and their committee.
But that's pretty much
Great.
it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Any, did you all, did you go yet? No.
Oh, I saw this right.
Okay.
I think it was Spanish.
Spanish,
He already put
Oh,
his,
my bad.
yeah.
Spanish, yes. Well, the interactive map will definitely have that. And my high school Spanish skills do not enable me to do my presentations in a way that would be not insulting to anybody who speaks Spanish. So
We'll figure it out. I have a couple of ideas, but it's really late and we've been at a meeting since 6:15. So, but I do have some ideas about that as well, because it's really all about engaging community where the community is. And language is one of those ways. So, we'll talk about it. Yeah, exactly right. Right. We could split
Doesn't have
that
to
up.
be more
Yeah,
complicated.
exactly my thought.
All right.
Okay. That's
We
it.
have a motion to adjourn our special, our meeting, our work session.
Yes.
Turn back to special session.
So moved.
Second, third.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We are now back in special session.
Mhm.
And clerk, corporation counsel, bottle washer, and husband to a great gardener.
Here, I'm sorry.
No. I'm talking loud, so let's just. move.
No, she's probably not hearing you.
Okay,
We're getting
Okay.
eyes.
Here we go.
What's the matter?
do we have anyone in the audience, Jamie, who wants to comment on any of our resolutions tonight? Okay, then I just see one person. I don't think we see hands, so let's go. Authorize agreement with McLaren Associates for structural peer review. Resolved that following review by the Corporation Council, the village manager is authorized to sign the limited professional services standard agreement with MG McLaren Engineering and Land Surveying, 530 Chestnut Ridge Road, Woodcliff Lake, New Jersey, for McLaren Engineering to conduct a structural peer review for the proposed structure at 78 Croton Avenue. And be it further resolved that the terms of the agreement are detailed in the January 19th, 2023 proposal. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments?
We have a time frame on that?
We expect that once we give them the go-ahead, it's about 1 month.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Sale of Hunter Street property, whereas Section C 3-12B of the Village of Ossining Charter states, the Village Board of Trustees may purchase, hold, and convey real property in the name of the village. Every conveyance by the village shall be executed in its corporate name by the mayor in pursuance of a resolution of the Board of Trustees. And whereas New York Village Law, Section 1-201, Sub 1, provides that the village shall have power to take, purchase, hold, lease, sell, and convey such real and personal property as the purposes of the corporation may require. And whereas in furtherance of the public interest and consistent with the authority of Section C 3-12B of the Charter and Section 1-102 of the Village Law, the Board of Trustees determined by resolution on July 6, 2016, that the village-owned property at Hunter Street, tax map designation 97.07-1-57, is no longer needed for public purposes and wishes to convey the property. And whereas the village manager on behalf of the village entered into negotiations and came to terms on the conveyance of the property to Hunter Street Properties LLC for $16,500. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees authorizes the conveyance of real property located at Hunter Street to Hunter Street Properties LLC for $16,500. And be it further resolved that the village manager is authorized to enter into a contract of sale and to tender a deed with any other related instruments in accordance with negotiated terms and conditions, such documents being subject to review and approval by the Corporation Council. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? Stuart, I have a question.
Sure.
The contract itself, we said we were going to be very specific limitations and all that. So do we get to see that, or is it just something you're doing?
It's being done by myself and my deputy.
But will the board get to see that as well?
If you wish, generally I don't show you the contracts, but if you want to see it, you're welcome to
Only
see it.
because this had some,
But, Sonia's been told specifically what it has to have in there.
okay,
to
I
give it
personally
the-
just would like
if
to
you'd like to
see
see
it.
it,
Yeah,
when-
I'm just,
I will.
because this
I do
went
too.
back and forth so many times. I just want to see it.
Okay. Has not been.
Not everybody wants to see it.
I-
So
I-
far, it's just me and, right,
Yep.
I'm just gonna say Manny and myself would like to see it. Not everybody wants to.
Do we have?
Yeah, we're in
all
the
tho-
vote. All those in
those
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Motion to adjourn the special meeting to go into executive session for matter of personnel and litigation.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our many meetings tonight. Congratulations to the officers who have been promoted. We did that earlier this evening, and we will see you next Wednesday, 7:30. Have a good evening.